And welcome to our meeting of Monday, June 17th, 2024. We'll call the meeting to order by resolution. Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor Densham, that the meeting of the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry be hereby called to order.
All those in favor? Motion is carried. None opposed. Adoption of the agenda.
It's moved by Councillor MacDonald, seconded by Councillor Bergeron, that Council approve the agenda.
Any questions on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion is carried. None opposed. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Seeing none, move on to adoption of the minutes.
It's moved by Councillor Densham, seconded by Councillor MacDonald, that the minutes of the meeting, including the in-camera minutes of the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry, held May 21st, 2024, be adopted as circulated.
Any questions on the minutes? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Moving on to delegations, and starting with the 2023 financial statements. Jamie Pollock, welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Warden. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. I believe most people know who I am. I'm Jamie Pollock. I'm a chartered professional accountant and partner with M&P here in Cornwall, and I'm happy to be here today to go through the financial statements for your fiscal year ended December 31st, 2023. If there's any questions or concerns or anything, if I skip over, please stop me, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. I believe they're on the screen behind me. They are currently in draft, but we will be in a position to issue our auditor's report upon the approval of the financial statements by council. So if we go to the independent auditor's report, it's about a page and a half, but I'll bring you to the second paragraph, which is our opinion paragraph. And it's probably the most important paragraph in the report that you want to hear from us, is that in our opinion, the accounting consolidated financial statements presents fairly in all material respects the consolidated financial position of the counties as of December 31st, 2023 in the results of its consolidated operations, changes in net financial assets, and its consolidated cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So it's a clean audit opinion. That's what you want to hear from us as your auditors. It states consolidated because it, besides the county's operations, it includes your library board and your police services board. If we go to the statement of financial position, this is your balance sheet. It is a particular point in time. It's at December 31st, 2023. Your total assets, financial assets, is $33.8 million compared to $33.1 million, an overall increase of $1.3 million or 4% from the previous year. Most of that increase is in cash, where the closing balance is $31.2 compared to $28.6. You do have a decrease in accounts receivable, which is the timing of outstanding grants receivable. It is lower compared to the previous year of about $1.9 million, which is actually good because that means there's cash that you collected from those outstanding receivables. That cash collected in the year was actually helped to pay down your accounts payable. So if you go down to liabilities, you'll see your liabilities at December 31st is $2.8 million compared to $4.4 million from the previous year. Very little change in future employment benefits payable, and there's no outstanding debt left over, and that small balance was actually with the library board. So your net financial assets at year end was $31 million compared to $28.6 million, an overall increase of about $2.4 million or 8.4%. Your non-financial assets, which mainly consist of your tangible capital assets, which is really your roads infrastructure, along with your buildings. This balance is $142 million compared to $137, an increase of $4.8 million. This is recorded for accounting purposes under PSAS. It's historical costs less accumulated amortization. It doesn't necessarily represent your replacement cost, which is usually higher than the book value or your fair market value of those assets. So your total accumulated surplus with those tangible capital assets is $175.4 million compared to $167, an overall increase of $7.7 million in the year. Under the consolidated statement of financial activities, your total revenue for the year, we look under like the middle column, $65.7 million compared to your budget of $63.3 million, an overall increase of $2.4 million compared to budget, or 3.8%, and majority of that revenue increases was under fees and service charges. Expenses for the year, $60 million compared to budget of $59.5 million. Just exceeding budget by a little bit of $433,000 or 0.72%. And when you look at the previous year, your overall expenditures only went up by $8,000. When you include other revenue for capital purposes, your surplus for the year, and this is the surplus recorded for the financial statements under public sector accounting standards, is the $7.7 million compared to a budget of $6 million for the year. And your previous surplus for last year was 8.6. If you go to the changes in the net financial assets, and if we just focus on the middle column, we take that same surplus of 7.7, we add back the amortization expense of your tangible capital assets, and the reason why we're adding it back is that it's a non-cash item, so that expense was $12 million. We reduce the acquisition of tangible capital assets, and this is what you spent in your capital budget during the year of $17.2 million, and then some, I'll say, changes in disposition of assets and inventory, which brings you to your overall increase in your net financial assets of $2.4 million. So this is the amount that actually went basically right into your cash bank account by the end of the year. And so when you look at your financial statements with this balance and your net financial assets going all the way up here, you actually had a very good year. You can see the cash is up by the same balance of about $2.4 million. You're in very good financial shape, and it shows there with your net financial assets being higher by the $2.4 million. Now with that $2.4 million, majority of that end up being transferred to your reserves, which you actually budgeted to. So out of that $2.3 million, $2.1 million of that was moved to your reserves during the year. And out of the remaining balance, which and I'll explain a little bit further, you had an overall operating surplus for the year of $890,148, and that gets moved over into your working capital reserve. If we go through the statement of cash flows, the cash from operations is $19.7 million compared to $20 million, and out of that $19 million, $17.2 million was used for the acquisition of tangible capital assets. That leaves to your overall increase in your cash position of $2.6 million in the year, ending cash of $31.2. The next two schedules is your consolidated schedule of tangible capital assets, and it's by asset type. And like I mentioned earlier, it's recorded for accounting purposes. The net book value is $142 million compared to $137. One key figure stat that we'd like to look at is this net book value represents 43% of the $325 million of your asset costs. That means you've used about approximately 60% of your asset life, and you have about 40% remaining of your asset life overall. But one encouraging sign that we do see, especially in the last 2 years, is that your purchases is greatly higher than your amortization. So $17 million in your purchases compared to $12 million in amortization. So what this means is that you're reinvesting your money back into your infrastructure assets higher than they are being depreciated. So you're always increasing your overall infrastructure of of your roads and all your other key equipment, like bridges, storm drains, and buildings and vehicles. The next schedule is just by segment, but it comes down to the same balance, and of course, most of it is under the roads department, which represents about 95% of your total assets, tangible capital assets. The schedule of accumulated surplus, the middle part is your reserves. Your total reserves at the end of the year is $32.7 million compared to $29.6 million, an overall increase of $3.1 million. And majority of that increase is under your roads, which that went up by almost $3 million. And the current year surplus is placed under the working capital reserves. As you can see, that went up by $890,000 in the year. You did utilize some other reserves for capital in the year, but your closing balance of reserves is $32 million. We do have some operating surpluses. The county's own operating surpluses is nil. It gets placed into reserves. You still have a library board surplus being carried forward of $555,000 and a police services board surplus of $97,000. In the tangible capital assets, as indicated, net book value 142. So the three key numbers is your accumulated surplus of $175.4 million. I'm just going to go to skip through all the notes to the financial statements. I'll leave that to your reading pleasure. If you're an accountant, you will love these notes. If you're not very much a big fan, but I don't blame you. So note 10 is the operating surplus breakdown for the year, and it, as indicated, $890,000 is your general surplus for the year. The middle column that I'm focusing on comes from the statement of financial activities. There's the surplus under PSAS, $7.7 million. You transferred $4.6 million to reserves. You use $564 of the reserves for operating, $1.9 million of reserves for capital. We add back, we deduct the tangible capital assets of $17.2 million, and amortization, we add that back. So overall, $731,000. There was deficits in the library board for the year of $38,000 and a planned deficit of $120,000 for the police services board, as you're actually planning to bring down their accumulated surpluses, which brings you to your overall surplus of $890,000 for the year. And as indicated, it gets placed into your working capital reserve as directed by your administration staff. So those are the financial statements. As indicated, you had a very good year. You had a good surplus, a strong surplus of $890,000, and you're still in very strong financial position with the amount of reserves that you have set aside, which is balanced off by the amount of cash in your bank accounts at December 31st, 2023.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Are there any questions or comments from members of council? Good job, Jamie, I guess.
All right.
And I believe we have a motion.
It's moved by Councillor Bergeron, seconded by Councillor McGillis, that Council receive the 2023 financial statements for the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry as presented by MMP LLP Chartered Professional Accountants.
Questions or comments? All those in favor? Motion is carried. None opposed. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. And I did this a big thank you to Rebecca and Maureen and Sarah and the rest of their staff for their cooperation during the audit. And when an audit goes well, everything goes well. So thank you very much, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 5.2, Long-Term Community Housing Development Plan. Welcome Melissa Morgan, GM of Human Services and Long-Term Care, City of Cornwall.
Good morning, Council. It's always a pleasure to be here to provide you with always much-needed information. Excuse me, Lisa and I are very pleased to share with you today the Community Housing Development Plan. The Community Housing Development Plan is a guide that's going to help us moving forward, and it'll allow us to get projects shovel-ready and also allow us to concretely lobby to other levels of government for funding. The only way we're going to get there is by maximizing the land that we have, protecting more land, and getting resources to build the affordable and attainable homes that we need. To assist us in creating this report, we've had the privilege of working with an amazing group of individuals from both Republic Urbanism and Parcel Economics. Republic is a Montreal-based consultancy specializing in community planning, engagement, and design. They have extensive experience working with municipalities across Ontario and specifically within the City of Cornwall and the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry. As it relates to this project, the Republic team assisted with the development of the Housing Revitalization Plan that we completed in 2020, which we often refer to in our reports. And this is the main impetus for undertaking this Community Housing Development Plan, which is being presented to you today. Republic's team led the planning and design for this plan, and they are represented by Paul Hicks, Michelle Bloom, and Jesse McPhail, and Paul and Jesse are here today to present to you. And Parcel is a Toronto-based land economics consultancy providing expert market advice to the Canadian real estate development and land use industries. Their team has a range of experience working with public and private sector clients across Canada to help evaluate the development feasibility and make informed strategic decisions. Parcel's team led the economic analysis and financial feasibility modeling of our plan, and they were represented by Chris White and Ryan Taylor. And I'm not sure if Chris has joined us virtually or not yet, but if not, he may join us at some point. But at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to Jesse and Paul to walk through the presentation with you.
Good morning, Mr. Warden, members of council. It's been a few years since I've been in this particular council chambers, and it's always very nice to return, so nice to see some familiar faces again. My name is Paul Hicks, and I'm a principal and urban planner with Republic Urbanism. As Melissa had mentioned, I'm joined today by Jesse McPhail, who is one of our project leads on this particular assignment. Jesse is going to do most of the talking this morning, and I'll be jumping in at some key moments in the presentation. But before I pass the mic over to Jesse to get the presentation started, just on behalf of our team, we wanted to extend a big thank you to Melissa and Lisa over at the City of Cornwall and their respective teams. They were quite instrumental, obviously, in shepherding this project along. And I delivered a similar message to the City of Cornwall Council when I said this is one of those projects that I don't think I've ever seen move as aggressively as it has forward, and that was very much due in part to Melissa and Lisa and their team cracking the whip at us and making sure that we prepared this plan in a timely fashion, so the City Council and County Council can move forward with some of these respective projects. So with that, I will pass the mic over to Jesse, who's going to walk you through the agenda and a little bit about the report.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, County Council. My name is Jesse McPhail, as you've just heard. I'm an urban planner with Republic Urbanism, so I've been with the firm for about 5 years now. Former employee of the Township of South Stormont, so grew up around the area, very familiar. Always happy to come back and work in the neighborhood. So as Paul mentioned, we had kicked this project off I think in late February, and so we're presenting this to you now as kind of the final product of this plan. As Melissa had alluded to, this plan is intended as sort of a visioning document to help guide the counties, the city, and the Human Services Department in providing much needed affordable housing and community housing over the next 10 years. So we'll jump into it. So you've already heard about our firm, so I won't go over that again. So we'll get right back into the Community Housing Development Plan. So a little bit of background and context here. So as Melissa had actually mentioned, Republic was part of the housing revitalization plan that was undertaken in 2020. So we worked with Colliers on that to evaluate existing community housing assets, as well as do a preliminary review exercise on potential lands that could accommodate new housing. So as part of that, we kind of looked at different properties throughout the area, largely publicly owned properties, had discussions with staff, administration on, what sites could have potential to accommodate new housing. So that was kind of the impetus for this. As far as the HRP, or the Housing Revitalization Plan, went, as part of that, it also conducted a housing needs assessment. So as part of that, it identified a need for 741 community housing units, or affordable housing units. This number was recently adjusted post-COVID, with the market and just the kind of crazy world we're in now, or post-COVID. So those numbers jumped up a little bit to 889 homes post-COVID. And the Human Services Department also determined that an additional 106 near or at market units would be also needed to meet the region's needs. So that totals to just shy of around 1,000 affordable housing units needed over the next 10 years. Keep in mind, this is kind of a snapshot in time as of 2023. That number will continue to fluctuate as homes are brought in or as additional need is required. So on the screen, you have a little bit of a breakdown of the unit types or by size. So primarily, the region is in need of 1 and 2 bedroom homes, particularly 1 bedroom homes. There was a big shortfall identified as part of the needs assessment. In terms of where these homes are required geographically, the split there represents what we're looking at in terms of meeting the need for the county versus the city. So it's about a 40-60 split between the city and county. Keyboard here. In terms of our mandate here with the Community Housing Development Plan, or CHDP, so again, it's a direct response to that need that was identified in 2020. So this plan, again, will specifically help the city, the counties, and the Human Services Department provide much needed community housing in the area. So this particular plan focuses on a set of 7 selected sites. So our work was largely focused on reviewing these sites and essentially from kind of step 1, evaluating the initial impressions of it, visiting the sites, identifying kind of the strengths, the weaknesses, some of the constraints that exist, and moving along kind of a systematic approach that I'll get into. But really just having this portfolio, evaluating what could potentially be done there, and developing concepts for them. With those concepts, they are kind of the focus of the plan, as well as some pricing estimates. The other side of the plan, though, is that we really wanted to work with Melissa and her team to establish a precedent for how we approach community housing design and moving forward. So, just because we're looking to maximize the number of community homes that we're looking to provide, doesn't mean we need to forego good planning and design and creating good communities. So we hope to establish a strong precedent for the way the city and the counties approach community housing development in the future. So in terms of this plan itself, we're looking at a proposed total of around 538 new homes under the plan. So this leaves a bit of a shortfall of around, it leaves a shortfall of 457 units, assuming every single unit gets developed according to this plan. So things could potentially change. Again, it is a concept, it is a vision, but it's just good to know how it stacks up in addressing that overall need. So in terms of the plan itself, the purpose really quickly, again, I don't want to get too redundant here, but we wanted to identify a forward-looking development vision for new community housing development on these selected 7 sites. We wanted to quantify the housing capacity and costs estimated for the development of each site plan. We wanted to guide implementation of the plan through a clear strategy, so detailing implementation, funding, scheduling, as well as I just mentioned the shortfall. We also wanted to highlight continuing gaps that'll exist, assuming that this entire plan gets carried out and developed. So just knowing that our work isn't done, this is kind of just the start of things. At the start of the plan, we felt with Melissa and her team, it was important to identify some guiding principles to inform our work going through the plan, just to keep us on the right track. So we called these our ABCDs for the project. So these were advocating for diverse housing forms, balancing economics with good placemaking, connecting with the surrounding communities, and destigmatizing community housing. An important note for most of the 7 sites is they're all kind of situated in existing built-up neighborhoods. So one of the important considerations there was making sure that we're integrating community housing with the fabric of the existing neighborhoods. It's a part of the planning process. We do understand that increases in density are required in some respects, but these guiding principles really helped us kind of keep our eye on the prize in terms of the design for the sites, while creating a smoother transition between an area that is, previously undeveloped or going through a period of transition. Further to that, we also looked for some inspiration in terms of the design for the concepts. So the missing middle housing concept was really used as a big inspiration for how we approached the design process and the types of homes that we were looking at proposing on the sites. So what I say when I say missing middle, these housing forms fall somewhere kind of between the low density housing like single detached homes and mid-rise apartments. Let's say it would be the lower end of the higher density. So these homes could be anywhere from, townhouses, stacked townhouses, plexes ranging anywhere from 2 to 8 units. So any of those kind of typologies there. And we call this the missing middle is because it's largely missing from our housing market right now, which is in part contributed to a lot of the affordability concerns that we're experiencing today. So we wanted to use these built forms particularly because they're generally compatible with traditionally low density neighborhoods and built forms. So again, getting back to that smoother transition, you're not putting an apartment block beside single detached dwellings in a lot of cases. You have that sort of smooth transition to density. Further to that, you have increased densities that support more walkable communities and neighborhoods. And lastly, the diverse housing forms in missing middle, it promotes a greater mixing of housing options, accommodating a range of household sizes, incomes, and lifestyles. So I will note that traditionally missing middle is referring to middle income, middle class, that sort of thing. So we do understand it's a community housing plan, so we did need to tweak our approach a little bit with respect to how we approach these things, because again, we needed to make sure it made economic sense at the end of the day too, from a design perspective. So these are just a few examples of the typologies that were used for the design. In terms of the approach that we used for the plan, and particularly the design of each concept for the sites, this was kind of the systematic approach that we used. So as I mentioned earlier, we visited each of the sites, we went through SWOT assessments and blocking concepts to really kind of build a story for each site, just making sure that the design concepts make sense for each context. We're not having a one-size-fits-all approach. So without going through all of this, this is kind of the general approach that was followed for developing each of the concepts. In terms of estimating site capacity, this was kind of done towards the beginning stages where we were going through the initial building blocks for each site. So one of the early things that we did was identify average unit sizes to be used to estimate building footprints. So this is really something that helped us fit up the properties before we started planning around. And the last thing that we did was determining the unit split to be used on a per site basis. So the housing revitalization plan identified an overall need. It further broke down the number of units by size, so 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. So that unit split we applied to each of the sites to make sure it made sense with what the housing revitalization plan was calling for. We could, propose whatever is like a best fit scenario for each of the sites, but we wanted to make sure, again, we're aligning it with the need so we're not having a surplus of, 4 and 3 bedroom units. So in terms of translating those concepts or that approach into the actual concepts themselves, we used a handful of different lenses that really helped us to evaluate a site's potential. So each of these lenses are kind of noted on the screen there. So we looked at mobility and transport, land use and zoning, green space and recreation, as well as building heights and massing. So again, these really helped us paint a clearer picture for the team and how we approach the design for each site. And there you have one of the concepts kind of in its finished stage. So layering all those lenses together helped us create something that kind of makes sense for each site based on its own context. So with that said, we have two examples today from the county that we wanted to share with you. So the first example is located in Glen Walter in South Glengarry. So this site, I do want to note at the top, I believe this is the only one in the portfolio that is not actually currently owned by the City or Human Services Department, and that further discussions will be required with South Glengarry. So again, really want to just drive home the fact that we put together kind of a more or less a proof of concept for this particular site to give a flavor of what could be possible on the site. We did speak with Township Administration just to make sure that the scale of what we were looking at as a concept was appropriate based on what the municipality's future plans were for the site. So I just wanted to kind of disclaim that up on the top. That said, again, consulting with staff, we did work with them to develop a little bit of a concept here. So we understand how important this site is from a recreation and open space perspective with the regional park. And we tried to integrate as much open space into the concepts as possible. So we'll just show here. So there are two kind of 2-acre parcels, one on either side of Kilkenny Crescent. So again, this is kind of based on a council resolution that was passed last year, I believe, indicating that further conversations again would be needed. But the design itself proposes 84 new homes total. This is split between a mix of townhomes, so single-unit townhomes, and a multi-unit 8-plexes. The lower density townhomes are located, as you can see, on the western parcel, and this ensures a smooth transition from existing singles and semis in and around the site. The higher density units, so the 8-plexes, are proposed on the eastern block, which allow for greater separation between the existing neighborhood. The concept considers also a potential future connection of Nada Drive with Kilkenny Crescent. So you can see there on the right side, Nada Drive kind of terminates east of the site itself. So we wanted to make sure that we kept that opportunity available to connect those roads in the future. One of the primary concerns or considerations here, I will also note that is servicing, so water and sewer servicing. So this is something that's applied to all the sites throughout the portfolio, which will ultimately determine the scale and intensity of development possible. So this, again, will need to be revisited with South Glengarry in terms of servicing, as well as the amount of actual land that will be available for development. So with all that said, we have two kind of costs or numbers here that were presented for each of the concepts. I will explain a little more detail in a little bit, just the difference between those, but very briefly, we have an estimated cost and an estimated equity requirement for each of the concepts. So the difference between those two generally is the estimated cost is your estimate of the raw overall development costs that are required to fulfill that development. The equity required is post obtaining mortgage or incurring debt, and what the city's county will be responsible for in terms of equity. So whether it's through grants or other programming or dedicating budget, that's sort of the number that's the more important one to focus on here. So in terms of an equity requirement per unit basis, for this site in particular, we're just shy of around $250,000 per unit for the development of this site. So not a small price tag, but as part of the plan, it's important that number is kind of upfront to give a flavor for the kind of funding requirements that are needed to develop the housing. The second example we have is in North Dundas. So this is in Winchester. This is at 517 Albert Street. So this site was one of the few in the portfolio that actually contained an existing building. So as such, the anticipated timeline again for this development will be quite a bit longer than some of the other sites. due to the required need for rehoming of residents, demolition, construction planning, those sorts of things. So the site itself currently, as you can see, contains a 2-story apartment building with 36 homes in it, as well as the Care for Seniors Support Center, shown in the bottom left of the site. So this is the proposed concept here. This would see a removal of the existing building and a replacement with a higher capacity building. So whether it's 3 to 4 stories, and this would propose 62 new homes on the site. So this would be a net increase of 26 homes on the site. So leveraging the potential capacity of this site. One of the primary reasons that this site was included in the study is that it appeared as part of the housing revitalization plan that it was underutilized in terms of the number of homes it could accommodate. So we have a couple other higher density apartment blocks in and around this area, and so we'd be looking to sort of match that in terms of capacity for this site. The existing parking area itself would be expanded to accommodate the new units, and we'll note that the Care for Center would remain untouched as part of the proposed development concept. However, we did kind of play around with the idea of potentially in the future, there could be conversations that could be had with the organizations to potentially integrate the center into a new building if the entire site was to be considered for redevelopment. But for now, we've left that sort of untouched. In terms of the estimated cost for this one, we'd be looking at an overall cost of $17.5 million with an equity requirement of around $12.2 million. And this would translate to around $197,000 per unit for an equity requirement. So, getting back to the financial feasibility side of things, again, this is a very important step in the preparation of concepts. So Parcel Economics helped us to obtain those numbers. So they went through a pro forma exercise, evaluated sort of the macroeconomic and microeconomic conditions of the area, and prepared numbers for each of the concepts to give us sort of an idea of what we'd be looking at for a price tag here. So again, the plan outlines the 2 key numbers for each site to focus on. So again, we have the estimated development cost, which is our raw overall cost, and the estimated equity requirement. So again, this is arguably the more important variable, and it represents the estimated amount of funding required from the city and counties, whether it's through grants, again, budget, programming. That number for community housing generally represents anywhere between 60 to 70%. Of the overall funding, whereas with a regular market development, it would be closer to 50%, 40% in terms of that ratio. So, in summary, in terms of the development concepts, if the entire portfolio were developed as proposed, this would result in 538 new community homes in the region. And this would come with an estimated development cost of around $177.7 million. Again, with that estimated equity requirement, we'd be looking at around $123.3 million. So we have a breakdown of the number of units proposed. So again, this is very much tied again to that housing revitalization plan and the need identified on a unit basis. I will note that for 1-bedroom units, the target would be 5% of those being fully accessible, so barrier-free, just to ensure that residents have full accessibility. So in wrapping up, we do have a few slides just on implementation and moving forward on the plan that Paul will speak to.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jesse. So as Jesse had mentioned, after we had gone through the design and pro forma exercise and the financial exercise with respect to the development of these sites, we also put together essentially a high-level implementation framework to help guide staff and both respective councils through the development process. As a part of that, we touched on an overall framework and the different steps associated with the development program, theoretical or hypothetical schedule should the city and county council move forward with the entire development program, a little bit about funding, and then also about monitoring. What Council's seeing before them right now is the high-level framework that I had just spoken about. So this is walking staff and in the respective councils through that development process, incorporated into kind of the 5 stages of the development process. We also include some advice and some direction on kind of best practices. So when we think about something like stage 4, for instance, it's around the occupancy or the lease-up stage of the development process, when we're starting to move people into the facilities, there'll be guidance in there because we know that the individuals that are moving in are often people who are already on assistance programs right now. So guiding through best practices into how to integrate people into these units once they've been developed and move them out of their existing facilities. We go on to the implementation schedule. Again, this is a high-level schedule showing the development program through this year through 2034 if it were to be implemented in its fullest capacity. The outline that you see there, the 7 different sites, the ordering and the prioritizing this was developed in conversation and with municipal staff, particularly with Lisa and Melissa's office. We go into the next one.
And it will just note, and this is just based on kind of a desktop review and kind of a relatively quick evaluation of that timeline. So again, they are concepts, and just remind everyone that this schedule is not set in stone either. So if there are things that need to be massaged around, then by all means.
With respect to funding, we've identified a number of funding programs that are available through the federal, provincial, and governments, as well as Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So again, these are funding programs that both respective councils could rely on to assist in covering that equity gap and fully funding the program. Obviously, there's some very aggressive funding programs right now, particularly from the federal government, and so lots of opportunities to take advantage of these. Again, part of this exercise was really attempting to help both city and county council be ready to make application. So to have gone through that process of identifying things like site capacity and an overall development program and costing for these. So this is really a huge part of this, is to assist the respective councils with making application to these higher levels of government to assist in getting these projects off the ground. And then finally, with respect to implementation, we also talked a little bit about monitoring, wanting to ensure that, again, if we're going to be spending these very, very large public dollars on public housing program, that we have a monitoring and evaluation program that goes along with it to make sure that the program or the development program would be achieving what it's meant to do. So we've outlined 3 main steps to help monitor the implementation of success or challenges with the program, to see that development program adjusted along the way if need be over that 10-year period. And this includes the identification and the use of key performance indicators, collection and maintenance of up-to-date data on each of the developments, and undertaking regular reporting to both county council, city council, and stakeholders in the community about progress in implementing the plan. And with that, I'll pass the mic back over to Jesse.
So, in closing, a bit of a recap here. So, in 2020, again, we had the Housing Needs Assessment and the Housing Revitalization Plan that identified, again, with that adjusted number, just shy of 1,000 affordable homes needed over the next decade. So, we come to 2024, we have the Community Housing Development Plan. We are looking at proposing 538 new affordable homes over the next 10 years. And again, we have our associated price tags overall and of course, equity requirements. Again, just reminding everyone that this does result in a shortfall of around 457 homes that are still needed over the next decade. So just to give council a little bit of an idea of an estimate of what that would look like in terms of additional dollars, you'd be looking at an overall development cost estimate of around $150 million for that shortfall. So if we tack that on to the what's covered in the plan, and an equity requirement of around $107 million. So how that translates to the land need, we'd be looking at just shy of 10 hectares of land if we were using a similar density and approach as the concepts in the plan, around between 9 and 10 hectares to accommodate those units. And with that said, that's all for us, and I guess we'll pass it back if there are any questions or comments.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McGillis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warden. Thank you for your presentation, Paul and Jesse. Kudos to everyone who was involved in doing all this development plan. It's pretty intense. Lots of money.
Yes.
I was just wondering, was there any thought put into doing anything on the first floor in terms of commercial? I know that we generate more funds and, you know, for, through leases and possibly rents.
We did, one of the concepts that we looked at was a live-work scenario. So it's typically ground floor, kind of non-residential with upper floor. So there are 2 sites in particular that we contemplated that. At 330 Montreal Road, just down the street here, the former, I guess it's an existing community satellite police station. So there has been discussions, although I don't think there's anything firm at this point, but there is discussions about flexibility for having that ability to have, whether it's an institutional use or another service use on the main floor. The other site was Joe St. Denis Park. So there are a few apartment blocks proposed as the concept there, and so those could be made flexible to accommodate whether it's, you know, neighborhood commercial uses or other services to help offset that. But those were kind of the two primary ones. That's not to say that there wasn't.
Subsequent question?
Thank you. Yeah, you see in other communities where it's effective and it's working well, generate those funds. But maybe there's another, you can tap into another revenue stream at the provincial level too, if you went with commercial. That's just the thought.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williams and Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. It's a very impressive-looking plan. Obviously, lots of work has gone into it, and I like the approach, generally speaking. There is a however. I think it was mentioned early on that the focus was on publicly owned land. Is that correct? Exclusively, or is Glen Walter privately owned? It's publicly owned. Yeah. And I'm, going to put my North Glengarry hat on here because there's 3 municipalities that this plan doesn't even touch, and of course we need affordable housing in all of our regions across SDG. So that is a problem as far as I think North Glengarry is concerned. Admittedly, we don't have a lot of publicly owned land that would be suitable for development. However, we do have a lot of privately owned land. As significant pieces are owned by private owners who could have philanthropic intentions. And I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity there, because we still have in excess of 400 homes that need to be built or planned on being built. I'd like to see some affordable housing planned in North Glengarry. I'm sure the other municipalities would say the same. So is there an opportunity here to look at privately owned land and say, look at for a tax receipt, will you donate a parcel of land so that we can have affordable housing in our community?
If I might, through you, Mr. Warden, and I might be speaking a little bit on behalf of Melissa and Lisa, and I know that they can come and correct me if I'm wrong. But I'd probably suggest that Melissa and Lisa's team would be very much open to any type of land dedication, public or private, coming in their direction. Certainly one of the challenges in preparing a plan such as this is our land costs. Everybody's seen the per unit calculation. Those have been up on the screen a couple of times now. It's, land development and housing development is not a cheap date at the end of the day, and a huge component of that is the land acquisition costs. So I'm kind of speaking from a high level, but certainly I think if there was any opportunity where a private landowner wanted to dedicate land or consider disposing of that land at a reduced price point for the development of community housing, I'd probably put forward that you'd have some very open ears at the Human Services Department to consider that. In this particular case, this exercise was really focused on kind of these 7 publicly owned sites that are already in public hands and could be easily put forward for development. But again, I would rely on Melissa and Lisa to correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly I think there would be a willingness to entertain any of that.
Through you, Mr. Warden, certainly just everything Paul said is correct.
great. Thank you. Councillor McDonald and Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Warden. I love the mention of missing middle. I watch YouTube, you owe the urbanity and not just bikes. And they are always talking like, downtown old Montreal is kind of the key, or Netherlands often. I like that you mentioned like livable communities and that mixed use planning. On our behalf, because we kind of control policy, is there anything that we can do with our own official plans or any advocation to encourage, I would say, more density or smaller houses that gets in the way of this type of development that you can recommend to us?
Certainly. I think so. Two things. I think, and we kind of had the same conversation with the city of Cornwall, is because they had asked us kind of where we thought that they were at with respect to their policies and how they are, whether they're benefiting or hindering. And I don't think, based on the counties, how new their official plan is, I don't think it would be a hindrance. That being said, so many policy changes and paradigm shifts have taken place over the last year and a half even, especially with the provincial changes to legislation. And so I think one of the recommendations I think that we would put forward is to just, keep working with your community, with your planning departments to stay on top of those changes as they come. And I think really though, it really kind of begins at a local level. So the county level, of course, you have the official plan that's kind of the overall, policy document, but really I would say it kind of starts with the zoning bylaws and how you're regulating development. So whether it's, lot sizes and minimum dwelling sizes and permissions for certain types of housing, that would be where I would say would probably have the most impact. And then the second side to that would be potentially exploring programming at a local level. So you have provincial and federal programs to support housing. There are tools like community improvement plans and other programs where you could look at potentially incentivizing the private market with a little bit of a carrot approach to encouraging them to provide some of that affordable housing, as was mentioned on the sort of the private side of things. Those would be kind of my two things. I don't know if Paul, if you had anything to add.
Sure. I mean, through you, Mr. Warden, I mean, just a couple additional comments on what Jesse's brought up. I think kind of two things that, and this is not necessarily something that involves necessarily the planning framework that we have and that we're working with, kind of the official plans and the zoning bylaw, but a kind of couple things to keep in mind on that front, because we're looking at wanting to increase affordability across the board, and I know that's not a secret, and everybody wants to do that. This is one key piece of that equation of increasing overall affordability of housing across the province of Ontario. And the second is wanting to encourage a more diversified housing base. So it's not all just single detached dwellings, but we're also including apartments and townhouses and plexes that can serve households throughout their existence. Not everybody is a 2.5 child household. We have people that live on their own, that are empty nesters, all the rest of that fun stuff. But I kind of couple, I think some of the key challenges, that particularly working through, because as Jesse said, there's the policies that the county has right now. They're very new policies. They were only finalized a few years ago. But I think a couple key things to keep in mind. One, when we look at markets such as Cornwall and SDG, what we find developers in the development community have developed a strong competencies in developing single detached dwellings and building townhouse units. That's what they do, and they're really, really good at that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But helping the development industry diversify their offerings, helping them develop competencies in building low-rise apartments and stacked townhouse units is going to be one of those kind of key things that could come through the creation of pre-approved plans for 6 or 8 plexes or small low-rise apartments. But helping your development community build those competencies is a key one. And I think one of the other things we ultimately have to keep in mind, and this is a little bit above all of our respective pay grades, but the reality is, as we're in, and you've seen this through some of the costing that's been put forward to you today, development is a very, very expensive game at the end of the day. And the margins for many of the developers, particularly in markets like SDG and Cornwall, those margins are smaller than you might see in some of the larger centers like Ottawa, Montreal, or Toronto. So really helping to gain a better understanding of the market in your own community, and helping to advise your development community of what that market potential looks like, and understanding what their pro formas look like, what their development programs look like, I think will also kind of go a long way in helping to understand what's right and what's going to work economically in each of your respective communities. Sorry, that wasn't a long-winded answer, probably was, but.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bergeron.
Through you, Warden. I have two main questions. The first one is regarding the housing on 9th Street, where within weeks of it being opening, there was media about the vandalism that occurred in it. And I mean, that kind of news is very discouraging for the taxpayers who are already struggling with the economy today. So I wondered, if there was anything that could be done to avoid this in the future. The second one is actually in regards to the unit that's supposed to go up in North Dundas. So you have a price tag of $17 million, and I'm surprised Lachlan didn't come up with this. But the unit's not going to be built till 2032. So is that $17 million what it would cost today if it was built today? And if it's not, then for instance, the manor in North Dundas 4 years ago was told to be 23 million, is now at 63. And so the costs that you've put forward for projects that will be in the future are not accurate at all. So in North Dundas, you're tearing down a building that's already existing. Where are those tenants going to go? And in North Dundas, buildings cannot be above 3 stories high right now because of our firefighter equipment. Is that enough for you guys to go on right now?
Yep. So in order of that they were asked, I guess for the first one, with respect to the vandalism and that, I think from our end, with this exercise, it was a little more at the 30,000 feet level for design. So when we approach design, we do try to build good community, eyes on the street kind of principles, those sorts of things. But as far as operationalizing it and when it's built, I would maybe defer to Melissa or Lisa with respect to how the grounds are used, or if they're.
Through you, Mr. Warden, can all of you hear me from over here?
Yep.
So what I would say about the media articles that appeared related to 559th Street, I think there's always more information to things that appear in the media than what we are sometimes aware of. So those notices that you would have seen are in fact close to a year old. What we deal with in our properties is no different than what a private market landlord may have to face in terms of managing issues in regards to tenants and conditions of buildings. I would say, again, we always have processes available to us through the landlord-tenant board that we actively pursue when there is an issue within a building. And I just would, again, caution that sometimes what we may see in media or on even Facebook may not always be the full picture of what's happening. I think that answers the question.
Thank you. And then with respect to the cost estimates, I believe we have Chris White on the call. Okay, so he is definitely more qualified to talk about how indexing and how those estimates work over a 10-year period, but it's my understanding that that's all kind of baked into that formula. I don't know if Chris is able to... Oh. Okay. Here, Chris, I'm just gonna close
We're making
that.
you full screen, Chris.
There we go.
Okay, good morning, members of council, pleasure to be here. So to address the question regarding cost, rest assured there was a cost escalation assumption baked into the analysis that we prepared. So even though we're dealing with research and data predicated on what we have historical up to the present day, we assume a 5% per year increase thereafter, and that's going to roll back into an expression in 2024 dollar terms, but it assumes a certain timeline for market entry, as we call it, in terms of actually approving and constructing and occupying those units that are being built. So construction costs include an escalation over that same period.
Okay, good. Okay, Councillor McGillis.
Thank you again. For the potential of having more properties that are available for this type of builds, I was wondering, was there any discussion also regarding private systems? Now with the technology, we were at the SDG Summit on Friday talking about different things, and there was one presentation regarding the new technology for communal septic systems. And I was wondering if there was any thought put into that. So, you know, looking at fourplexes or whatever would be accommodating or suitable for that type of build. So looking at private outside city services is what I'm getting at.
I think I would say it's a good question. I would think if because all of the sites in the portfolio that we dealt with for this plan in particular they do have access to services, so we didn't really focus as much on those shifts in technology or how engineering's gotten better to be able to accommodate on-site servicing. But I would say certainly if there were properties that did become available that were potentially suitable, I think that would be part of the evaluation exercise. So we would kind of consider that as part of the overall picture. But I think from a cost and maintenance and that sort of perspective, I think ideally we'd be looking for, or Melissa and Lisa would be looking for fully serviced sites. But it's not to say that it's not out of the question, I don't think, if it came up. Because, again, we're in a housing crisis, so if we can provide that housing where we can, then I would say.
And building on that very quickly, it's certainly, I think we all recognize that the technology with those communal systems has increased and improved dramatically over kind of the past 20 years. I always remember starting out my planning career and being told to kind of avoid these systems like the plague. But we certainly have seen a lot of improvements in that technology. So I'm not sure necessarily if it's a question of it's not a technological question at hand, it's going to be a policy question at hand. And I think the one thing that I would always want to caution any council with these communal systems, and it's a situation that's kind of completely out of our control, but if you ever were to proceed on development on those communal systems, and again, the technology is improved, is that it's always incumbent on the local municipality to enter into an agreement under the Ministry of the Environment requires an agreement to be entered into between that property owner and the local municipality. So should that communal system fail, the local municipality has to take on that burden. That's usually kind of, I think today, because it used to be a combination of policy and technology. The technology issue has been addressed, but we still have that issue of the Ministry of the Environment, the responsibility agreement they call it, the Ministry of the Environment requiring a responsibility agreement. It might become a little bit of a lesser issue in a situation where if they're going to be publicly owned sites, perhaps there's less of a concern about that happening versus a private site. But the point's well taken, and certainly we've certainly seen improvements in the technology that allow us to explore maybe some locations that we haven't been able to explore before, particularly for some higher density development.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Densham.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and through you, thank you for the presentation. Very, very interesting, very telling. My question is more around demographics of the people that we're building houses for, in terms of, age demographics and whether or not the people that we're building for are potentially employable and therefore taking this burden of looking for a house or staying in a home is likely to allow them to earn more and then pay greater portions of the rent, or are we tilted more towards seniors who are retired at the end of their career and maybe transitioning into more long-term care out of the housing?
I think that might be a question for Melissa and Lisa, but I think I can speak from when we did do the housing revitalization plan. If I'm remembering correctly, as part of that needs assessment, that larger need for one-bedroom units in particular, that spoke to a shortage of housing for seniors or empty nesters who were unable to find those smaller units that require less upkeep and less cost. So I don't know if that answers the question completely, but maybe I'll pass it to Lisa or Melissa on that.
For you, Mr. Gordon, I'll just add some additional information. So our largest need right now on our centralized wait list is single-person, non-senior housing.
Thank you. Last question, Councillor Fraser.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warden, through you. So please bear with me when I go through this. Identified earlier that it's 40% housing needs in Cornwall versus 60% in SDG. And whenever my math on my fingertips, I think I identified there's 375 units identified for Cornwall over the next 10 years, 163 units identified for SDG. So over the next 10 years, if this was to work, we'd almost capture all of the need in Cornwall, and then the balance going 11 years forward, the focus would be almost exclusively SDG. Is that a fair assumption, using the numbers that I believe I understood?
Yeah, so that's accurate, and I think that's just it's more or less an unfortunate symptom of just the availability of lands.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Jesse. Oh. I do appreciate that, and that was I was going to ask Mr. Warden if I can continue. That is the reason, is that there's public services, there's a land available, and when we think of the land that's in South Glengarry, or the land that we need in North Glengarry or North Dundas or North Stormont, then it's incumbent on us to really bear down and make sure that we're able to provide the needed land with the needed services to go forward, like essentially from year 11, to make sure that we capture that. And I just wanted to make sure that was captured for my fellow councillors. It's incumbent on us to do what Cornwall has done, because the numbers really prove that Cornwall has made efforts to satisfy the need with their land and public services available to that, and it's incumbent on us to do that. And if I may, Mr. Warden, whenever, Jesse, you talked about the shortfall of the 457 homes and the equity, and it was 160 million, I think it was. Is that equity or total development cost?
So the total development cost is estimated around 152 million for that shortfall. The equity requirement is around 107 million, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I'm sure if we have any more questions, we'll put them through our CAO Maureen. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to 5.3, Annual Housing Report. Melissa Morgan and Lisa Smith.
So good morning again, Council. So you know it's June, so we normally bring our annual housing plan, so we just thought we'd do all things housing today. So what you have in your council agenda is actually the full report that is going to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. We're not going to go through all of that today. We would like to highlight some key information on some key slides, just as it relates to what has occurred in the last year and what we're looking forward to in the future. So again, this report is a mandated report by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. We are required to do an annual report, but this is the last year of our 5-year report, and it is the second phase of the 10-year housing report that the province originally mandated. And so at this point in time, we're uncertain of what the next phase of the ministry's requirements will be for a future housing report. Thank you. So
What you see before you is a tool called the Housing Continuum. We've presented the Housing Continuum before, but this is a slightly different version. I think the key takeaways about how this version that we're showing today is different is if you look at the descriptors underneath the different types of housing. So we would suggest that anything from homelessness to housing, or sorry, supportive housing is what we would refer to as essentially housing with supports, that they're all on the spectrum at that end of where the individuals living within those types of housing require a bit more help in terms of maintaining and sustaining the stability of their housing or even getting into housing when you look at someone who may be experiencing homelessness. This concept of attainable, and you probably heard me mention that when we were talking about attainable market rents, is the idea that there's types of housing within the continuum where we really try to work with folks to kind of find something that will help support their income and long-term success and essentially make their lives more affordable and then essentially set them up for success as they move forward. And then at the far end of the spectrum is what we would call market rate. So that's that idea of this is the type of housing that is supported by private market sector. You might see this in terms of development and or privately held rental properties. The key concept we'd want you to walk away with today is essentially for a healthy housing system, we have to have all of those components supported and available within a community. What you see is if one is underserviced at any time, that's where we start running into essentially crisis within our system. And what we also want you to walk away with is to know that different types of people, depending on their circumstances, need different types of housing, and we really should be working as, frankly, a community, a region, a province, a nation to make sure that's available.
On this next slide, just again to bring everybody back on why we're here today. Basically, that is a result of devolution, and originally housing was administered or delivered by the province, and it was devolved to municipalities in the early 2000s. That's when the City of Cornwall became the service manager. So we are the service manager for the City of Cornwall, but we also undertake housing in the entire geographic region, so we equally oversee SDG as well.
So essentially what you see before you is when we look at how our housing system is funded in Cornwall and SDG, this is essentially how the money breaks out. So what you'll see is roughly right now to run our housing portfolio, it takes about $24 million to do so. Of that, 38% comes from municipal governments like yourself. 27% is coming from the province, but I would highlight that is primarily program funding to support initiatives around homelessness. Very little provincial money actually flows into the construction and ongoing support of community housing. I think what's always really important to highlight is how much actually comes from tenants. So tenants themselves, in terms of the rent they pay, other fees around parking, laundry, things like that, actually support our budget up to 26%. Again, I think it's interesting that's almost comparable to the provincial investment in the system. Federally, right now, 7% of the funding is coming from federal housing. That's primarily coming through the mortgages that still remain on some of our community housing programs. Once that money goes, that may flow to us through programs like our Ontario Provincial Housing Initiative or our Canada-Ontario Community Housing Initiative. Again, but those are very programmatic dollars as opposed to supporting at times the construction and maintenance of community housing. And then the last bit there, other, it's just other kinds of fees and services that we have that go towards supporting housing. So just when you look at affordability and who is in crisis and kind of what's driving the crisis, I think it's really important to always talk about core housing need. So core housing need is the concept that in Canada, no one should be paying more than 30% of their income towards housing costs. So that's the threshold that Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation sets. What we can tell you is that that's probably not happening. So what you can see in 2021, 1 in 10 households were in core housing needs. So that means they live in housing that is over that 30% cost of their income. If you also layer on other things, and if you look at the legend, there's like a little hammer and a wrench, and then there's like people lying in a bed. That refers to the quality of the housing, because that's also a measure as well. So a lot of folks may be in housing that is closer to affordable, but maybe not in good condition, or they could be living in housing that's closer to affordable because there's so many folks maybe living in a one-bedroom apartment to be able to afford the rent. I'm going to go to this one. Okay, so this information that we present to you today actually comes from the House of Lazarus. They have done a housing study looking at the county, and they took some economic numbers that we have available to us around housing, and they applied these measures of housing affordability. So again, you can kind of see how the median household income breaks out across the region. You can also see the average cost of a monthly rental unit, and that's a 2-bedroom. So I think, again, these numbers are really interesting in terms of the levels we're now at. So if you look at something like in South Stormont, that to rent a 2-bedroom apartments cost around $1,800 a month. So that's a fairly significant investment of families making in terms of paying for their rent. I think the other stark number is what's available to families once they've paid for their rent. So again, if I could refer you to South Stormont, the remaining money after they've basically paid their 30% of income to housing is $183. So if you're a family of maybe 2 or like a couple, or even a family of up to 4, maybe living in a 2-bedroom, you don't have a lot of money to live on if your median market income is in that level to pay for groceries, insurance, anything else that may be happening within your general ongoing household expenses. The other interesting number is at the bottom level. So if we kind of apply these measures to houses being sold within our region and how affordable that is for folks, right now, again, I'll just refer back to South Stormont as the example. Only 2% of homes that were sold in that region are actually falling within that affordable threshold for families. And we've heard anecdotally the statement said that really now to afford a single-family detached home, you have to be earning an income of close to $100,000. So which is significant in terms of what's available to folks, particularly when you look at the fact that the median household income is actually $81,000. So we have a gap. In terms of homelessness, we're starting to talk more about this concept of homelessness because I think a lot of folks think of that as individuals who may be living within a tent or a temporary shelter. It's actually far broader than that. So folks who are in tents are what we would be considered unsheltered. There's also folks who live in emergency shelters. That could include individuals living in victims against violence shelters, even sometimes domiciliary programs, things like that could be considered kind of emergency sheltered. There are also a lot of individuals considered provisionally accommodated. So this was a term you might have heard historically used called couch surfing, where you may have someone who can kind of float between friends for maybe a couple months and then they lose that housing. So what we're starting to anecdotally see in our office is more and more of this. More folks coming in, I had a place to live, a new landlord's come in, they're kicking me out, or I had a place to live with my friends, now that's not happening. So we can see this pressure happening within the system. At the end of the spectrum is the at-risk of homelessness. And again, we know across not just Cornwall and SDG, but the province and the country, that this is growing. So this is where we had folks maybe pre-COVID that were hanging on, maybe making their bills and their rent work, and now, maybe have lost jobs, maybe only be able to secure a lower paying job, who are more struggling at that at-risk of homelessness spectrum. So we see more and more people tipping into homelessness every day, and they're not usually who you think of as being homeless. Again, I won't spend a ton of time here. I think the key takeaway from this slide is just again around the perception of who is homeless. It's 50% of individuals who have experienced homelessness were homeless before they were 25. So what this shows us is homelessness usually is directly connected to things like maybe family violence, some trauma, essentially where a young person's making a decision that it's safer to leave a home and go into housing precarity than stay in my family home. So I think that's just an important thing for us to remember about when we see people who maybe are homeless and how they got to that point. The information on this slide, just for your reference, primarily comes from national point-in-time count data. So most communities who get either federal or provincial funding do a count of homelessness, and one of the things we do is when we're talking to folks, we find out a little bit about age, when they first became, and circumstances that impact that experience for them. So what we can see in terms of impacts, and I think the number at the top where it shows you those pill bottles is really quite stark. Again, so a house person on average will cost the system about $524 in terms of healthcare costs. For someone who's homeless, it's close to $2,500. And again, that data is older. So what this means is we know that folks who have been homeless a long time or even short-term experiences are less healthy. So there could be things going on in terms around either they were ill and became homeless, or they've ended up in homelessness and their health has declined due to that experience. And we always talk about the number in the middle, which is the cost of the different systems. So for example, to have someone in shelter costs close to $2,000 per month per bed, whereas, you know, if we do something like a rent supplement, it costs us $701 to do the same kind of work. You can see the hospital system's quite expensive, same with provincial jail, but the most affordable solution is community housing. So this ties into things that Melissa will reference around housing first and why we know that's best practice in terms of how we support this issue.
So the next couple of slides are all about Housing First principles. This is a pretty good snapshot of what Housing First actually means. We have tended as a society to revolve around housing readiness, and we need to be moving to a Housing First process. So certainly studies have shown that permanent housing leads to better outcomes. When individuals are in shelters or you know, the shelter system doesn't necessarily provide a stable model for housing readiness, whereas if you move to the transitional piece, that leads into more, and that's what we're trying to focus on a little bit more, is some transitional housing. As Lisa mentioned earlier, not everybody is ready. They're at different spectrums in where they need to be in housing readiness. So a Housing First approach tries to move towards a system that provides permanent housing in the long term, which then provides stabilities leading up to life stabilization. So that's where we are focusing our efforts on, is as a Housing First approach. And this just gives you an idea of some of the Housing First principles, that these 5 principles in general, while you know, within the model, definitely leads to the ability for somebody to sustain permanent housing in the longer run.
So I think probably last year, you remember Melissa and I speaking to the by names list, and that being a tool that we use in the region. So we now have data available to us about who is homeless in Cornwall and SDG. So right now we have 61 actively homeless individuals, and that was as of May. You can see this number's fluctuating kind of between 60 to 70. It's been as high at times as 90, but there's been some really good work done by a lot of community organizations as well as housing to make sure people are getting housed. You can see 8 of those individuals are youth, and that 11 are families with kids and 4 are couples. So again, just that perception around, you know, that there are families and couples living in homelessness. It's not just all single individuals. The graphic on the far right there just shows you how the system is intended to work when you use a by name list system. So it's the idea that when people come in, we can identify them, identify what their needs are, and then start moving them towards housing placements and supporting them to be able to move into different types of housing, to move into that Housing First model so we can better support them. A real achievement for our team this year was we achieved qualified by names list data. So that you might be like, what does that mean? So essentially it means that we have a robust system in this community supporting this issue, and that the data we're producing meets data standard integrity requirements, meaning we have a pretty good tool to start responding to this issue. And you can see we were the 44th community in Canada and the 36th in Ontario to get this.
So the rest of the presentation is essentially on the housing and homelessness plan. There are 4 visions and 10 strategies in this plan, and we'll go through them with you pretty quick, but give you some highlights over the last year, how we've been able to address some of these strategies and visions.
So the first vision that we had as part of the plan was that people who are experiencing a housing crisis are housed or sheltered. So in terms of our strategies, a key piece of that was looking at how do we understand how the homelessness system's working and start to respond. I think the key takeaway to take away from this is we cannot solve this issue on our own. We do rely on community partnerships and initiatives that are happening with organizations like Social Development Council or even United Way to look at how we respond. Again, I've already highlighted kind of the success around our by names list, but the other thing that we have done is we've actually retooled our staff team. So we have 2 case managers and 2 social workers that are currently dedicated to a housing rapid response team. So when someone is reported as homeless or living in a tent, that team responds within 24 to 48 hours to go out and find them, find out what's happening. If they are living in a tent, we continue to support them as they live there to help move them towards a housing plan, and also just ensure some basic needs are met and things like that, and that they're getting income, all of those positive things to move them forward to housing stability. The other thing that that team does is it's our key component of our eviction prevention work. So what we really try to do is to make sure once we get people housed, that they stay housed. So, you know, stop feeding the system of homelessness is essentially the key component of some of that team and what the work they do. In terms of the other strategies, again, we look about how we're enhancing the homelessness system over time and then expanding the system of home awareness around what's happening with homelessness. So that presentations like this, other work we're doing within the community is really meant to support that work. I'm just going to see here quickly key highlights. So I've talked about our by name list. I think another big really powerful solution for this community was the winter housing solution that we initiated at Parisian Manor. I think that will support us as we move forward with Massey Commons. We've had a lot of learning experiences from working with this population and what works for them, and it's just, again, helping us to build robust partnerships around how do we support individuals to move towards like permanent housing. And I can see even when I look at the individuals living within Parisian Manor right now, there's been some really significant positive outcomes for them. And we even have some folks who are ready to move into housing. We just got to find it for them. So really positive work happening in this area.
Vision statement 2 is people who are currently housed but at risk of becoming housing remain housed. Many of you who either are joint services or from previous reports would hear about the funding that we get from the province with respect to our housing priorities. We can say as of from last year to this year, we did help 1,587 families, assisting them with the housing prevention program. This could be things like utility arrears, rental arrears, relocation expenses, some of those different types of things. Again, various partnerships that we've undertaken as well to help bridge the gap and guide clients in the right direction. Certainly, we continue to implement the recommendations from our housing revitalization plans you heard this morning. Some of the other key things in this area, we have purchased the former school, as Lisa said, and we're transitioning that into more type of supportive housing that will bridge the gap after we were able to move people from Parisian Manor to into Massey Commons, and that talks about this housing first approach. Lisa's already talked about expanding our team and moving more towards our social workers. Certainly we've noticed a gap in services in mental health, and so part of the response of that team is to also provide some interim mental health supports until we can connect clients into the right services. And in our last strategy, this one's a little bit different. This really was impacted during COVID and some of the changes that were made by the ministry. We had identified early in our strategy that we needed to really help strengthen employment supports. As many of you are aware, employment services have been offloaded from Ontario Works, and they have now are being delivered through local organizations within our communities. So certainly this is something that we've had to pivot, an example of a strategy we've had to pivot and move based on other ministry priorities.
So this vision relates to the fact that we want to maintain the suitable housing stock or suitable existing housing stock that we have. So to maintain, so I'm just going to pull this over, excuse me. So maintaining and enhancing that sustainability of our assets within our community portfolio. So one of the other pieces of work that we just recently undertook was we've done building condition assessments of all the internally held properties within the City of Cornwall and SDG, as well as all the properties held by our 10 external not-for-profit housing providers operating within the community. Those BCAs are intended to allow us to plan strategically around what is needed for housing stock and how we can maintain the assets that we currently have. In terms of looking at the overall supply of affordable housing available within our community, you'll see we reference the Ontario Renovates program. So again, since the time that program was created, we've assisted 821 households, 364 of which are in the counties. So you can see we do have significant county reach in terms of the programs and services that we're offering. There was a great question asked about how open we are to working with private landowners and private developers. So over the past year, we did meet with 10 different developers across the region to talk about how do we build affordable housing together, how our rent supplement program could support that. We do have very effective relationships with the staff within each municipality to work together on this, and folks like Tara Kirkpatrick often reach out to us to say there's an opportunity coming our way. So we are very active in terms of those discussions and looking at how we partner. So our final strategy is how do we also revitalize those assets? I won't spend a lot of time here because you heard a lot about that this morning. So there was a lot of discussion about how we can add existing stock as well. And just so you do know, we do have probably in this year alone with Morrisburg, our Pitt Street North initiative, as well as Massey Commons, we are bringing 68 new units into our housing supply, which then ties into our development update. So I won't spend a lot of time on Knight Street because I know we've been here and spoken about this before, and you're probably most aware of this one because it's what we've just most recently developed. In terms of our Pitt Street North property, you can see we will be adding 27 two-bedroom units to that property that we have secured through and hold as the City of Cornwall. Again, just some key features there. The barrier-free inclusion, we make sure that a certain percentage of units are barrier-free, and we always ensure energy efficiency additions, so things like higher glazing on windows, heat pump units, again, because the more we can save on utilities, it also helps tenants in terms of climate change impacts that they may be feeling. This is what our Morris Glen project is going to look like. So these renderings you may or may not have seen before. This is fairly new information. So what you can see is what the outside of the building is going to look like overall, a sample of a kitchen, as well as what the main interior entryway is going to look like. So it says here, we were issued for construction tender. Stage is now, there's equipment on site and there's digging happening, and we're going to a groundbreaking this afternoon. So it's definitely moving along. Our construction team is very keen to get things going, which is great. Our Massey Commons project, again, you've probably heard quite a bit about this, but it will have essentially a combination of two-bedroom family units, some one-bedroom units, and some micro units. The entire building, all of the units are barrier-free, so that any individual living with a disability or any sort of mobility issue will be able to fully navigate what's available in their apartment and the building. We will have our Housing Rapid Response team located on site. They will be helping to coordinate programs and services coming into the area, as well as working with our property management staff around that as well. So at this point, again, that project is actively rolling forward, and we're excited about adding those units to our portfolio.
And then our last vision is the supply of appropriate housing is enhanced. Many of what you've already heard, even from this morning, and what you've heard from Lisa and I thus far, has lent to this vision as well. Certainly things like collaborating with all of the various city planners and zoning to really look at whether or not there are innovative ways for us to consider redeveloping properties to make it as quick as possible for development. We certainly, as you heard, have the long-term development plan. We've been frequently speaking with developers. We also, as I mentioned earlier, this plan from this morning really is going to also help align us with the Eastern Ontario Warden 7 and 7 model. And so hoping that both of those can run parallel and that we'll be very successful with that. That would certainly help with that $177 million price tag. We also partner with other organizations like Habitat for Humanity to enhance home ownership, and as well like Lisa mentioned, we are very frequently speaking to other developers about possible options to partner. Just a bit of a note, the city does have a climate action plan. Certainly within that action plan, social housing has been identified, and so any development that we undertake certainly has a component of the climate action plan and energy efficiencies, as Lisa has been saying, as well as any upgrades we do to our existing portfolio. As we do those renovations, we look at energy efficiencies. This one was kind of our teaser slide before. You got the not under construction, but you got actually it's here now. So this was all on our long-term development plan, which you heard about this morning. So don't really need to spend much time there. And then again, in terms of next steps, where do we go from here? This plan, it's an annual plan that has to be, we have to provide an annual update. This is the last annual update, as I mentioned earlier. So now we are reliant on the ministry to guide us in what they would like to see in the next iteration of a 5 or 10-year plan. Certainly with or without that guidance, Lisa and I have a lot of work to do over the next 10 years. And whether, if the ministry does not mandate us to do a plan, we will certainly be looking at our own plan to guide us in the next 10 years. And that's the end of our presentation.
Okay, thank you. Very thorough report, and you two are committed that you're sticking around for the next 10 years?
I'll give you 2 at least.
Okay. We'll take it. Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Councilor McGillis.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. It might be a stupid question, but is there any thought of putting into purchasing existing buildings that are for sale, sound buildings, rather than building? And is there any funding stream for that type of purchase?
Through you, Mr. Warden. So certainly we have, whether the conversations that we've had with developers have been with respect to existing buildings, vacant land, what have you. One of the things we've demonstrated is the purchase of that former school. There have been other sites that have come available. We send our team in to review, to determine the overall structure, the necessity to do updates to those buildings, or the upfront costing to purchasing that. So we are open to those conversations. Sometimes the viability of the project, it's not worth the investment. It's just, sometimes it requires so much investment on the onset that it would be cheaper for us to build new, as an example. So not out of the realm of us to have those conversations or consider those options.
Go ahead. Councilor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I like your housing first approach. As a matter of fact, it's a really comprehensive report, so thank you. I just looking at your housing first approach, I can only imagine the challenges associated with housing somebody who's on Ontario Works, for example, with a very limited income, and then having to pay some sort of rent, and then having very little left over for anything else. And I'm just wondering just how great a challenge is that when it comes to really these people being able to survive.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So that's where our rent geared to income housing is so critically important, right? Because that really is what allows someone on Ontario Works or even ODSP to be able to better manage all of that. So what we know and what we hear from folks is we have a lot of desperate people who come into our office to find out, where am I on the wait list, what's happening with my application. Right now, the last numbers we had roughly on the wait list is if you're a single person, you're waiting at least 5 years. A family's about 3, maybe 4. Right now, seniors are able to get in quickest, in terms of the amount of housing available to them. But we know that individuals in this community are making daily decisions of, do I pay rent, or do I pay for dental care, or do I buy groceries, do I pay utilities? Like, we know that's happening for folks, and we see them coming in for support, and sometimes they've exhausted all their options and there's not much left. So it's It's definitely increasing too. So Melissa's slide around devolution, it kind of talked about like after COVID-19. So what we saw here was that was an issue, but as soon as COVID-19 happened, it literally was like putting gas on a fire. It's exploded.
Thank you. Councillor Broad.
Thank you, Warden, and through you, thank you, Ms. Smith and Ms. Morgan, presentations. Lots of work gone on these two presentations. Under the HPP plan, you say you've partnered with the United Way Last Resort program. Could you give me one example of something that wouldn't have been funded through HPP that the Last Resort covers?
Through you, Mr. Warden. So what the specific program that the United Way is providing is different than what we provide. Theirs is it's like a loan program, there's banking involved. It's a different structure in what we provide versus what they provide. So that's why in the past, the first year we had funded that. It is not a program that we're able to undertake. They have definitely the resources and the ability to deliver that program with additional funding. So it's different than what the two programs are different in the sense of how they approach housing, the need for housing requests.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much for your report. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break and be back here in 5 minutes exactly. we'll get ready to go again. And move on to Transportation, County Road 22, Hydro Utility Relocations.
It's moved by Councillor McGillis, seconded by Councillor Broad, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry accept the initial estimate for the relocation of hydro utilities along the extents of the County Road 22 reconstruction project at the total price of $1,121,776.55 plus HST, and that the Manager of Infrastructure be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract.
Perfect, thank you. Welcome, Mike.
Good morning, and thank you. So as we move closer and closer to construction with the County Road 22 reconstruction project, we're dealing with a 6.5 kilometer long stretch of road that is going to be widened. There's going to be impacts to the existing infrastructure on both sides of the road with grade changes, and a lot of the utility poles along that stretch of road date back to the 1960s or perhaps 70s. Some of them still have a stamp in the wood that says 1965. They're quite old poles, and they are much shorter than the current poles that they've been putting in places when they're replacing them. So there's a concern that when they do the grade changes at the base, those poles can't take the grade change. They either won't have enough embedment or they won't have enough clearance to the wires underneath. So we're looking at significant impacts to the utilities along both sides of the road. So Hydro has gone out there and they've conducted a survey of all of the equipment that they have, and they're kind of in a stage where they're pre-designed. They will not commence redesign of utilities for all new infrastructure until we approve this cost estimate that they've provided us. So that is the next step to proceed in order to get the utilities relocated and sort of firmed up so that we can get in there and start moving the earth around without undermining poles or risking, I suppose, having any large farming equipment hit wires. So they've provided this quote, and I've been coordinating with them a lot since the start of 2024, discussing the impacts. They have assured me that they have included for as much as they possibly can in this quote, with the intent that it would more likely be coming down as their design progresses, that this is kind of the worst case scenario. This includes the newer poles that are taller that have been put in more recently, which by the utility agreement which we have with them, we would be more responsible for a larger percentage of the costs if we were asking them to relocate it. So there's sort of this inverse relationship where if the newer poles are able to stay and we're only replacing older poles for which we are less responsible for the costs for, the price could come down quite quickly now not to the tune of where county staff had been estimating the cost before, nearly half this amount, but certainly we would be heading in the right direction. So in order to keep this project going and to get the utilities ready for the buckets hitting the ground, we would need to move forward with this.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and through you. Thanks for presenting this, and it's not surprising. I mean, I'm working with Hydro myself right now, and we don't have a lot of negotiating power with them. It's, they're in the driver's seat. Question is, are we going to be doing the same thing with Bell? Is this, just the first of the two utilities? I don't know if there's any gas along that road or not, but are we going to have the same issue with Bell, and do they have poles along there?
We have pre-consulted with a representative from Bell, and they have a lot of underground, and there are a couple of locations where we are going to have to spot check just to make sure that the cables are buried deep enough that we're not going to be exposing them. And there are several pedestals where we've identified that we will be raising the grade at the pedestal, which would effectively kind of bury it. But there's a sort of collar that we can slip down around it first and then backfill around the collar. So we're nowhere near the level of impact on Bell as we would be with hydro. So I imagine that the stringing of any Bell infrastructure from the poles is certainly not included in this, but Bell hasn't given us any sort of, their statement of impact is we need collars on pedestals, essentially.
Okay, thank you. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried, none opposed. Thanks, Mike. Moving on to planning, request to initiate official plan amendments, growth study, and housekeeping.
It's moved by Councillor Densham, seconded by Councillor McDonald, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry direct staff to initiate official plan amendments to support growth management and complete a general housekeeping update.
Don't screw this up, Peter. You got some fans over there watching you. So,
thank you, Warden, and happy to be here with my team that's also working on several of these official plan amendments. This one in particular, we're looking to fast track some of the municipal lands that are ready for development now that some of the housing legislation that's all been passed through and is kind of settling down. We are growing, and there's properties that are looking to be added to the urban boundary. This would give us authorization. If council directs us, we'd also be going to local municipalities. So I'm going to North Stormont next week. Some of the Stephanie is going to South Dundas next week as well, and your various planners will be reporting to your councils. So if council give us a go-ahead, we're hoping for the bylaw to come to council on August 26th.
okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. There are none opposed. Moving on to Planning B, Planning Services Resources, Municipality of South Dundas. Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor McGillis, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry authorize the creation of an additional position in the Planning and Economic Development Services Department to support the municipality of South Dundas, and that Council directs staff to amend the shared services agreement with the municipality of South Dundas to reflect the new position.
Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. So in addition to the role we play as a county in terms of managing the official plan, land division, severances, things like that, SDG Planning also provides planning services to several of the local municipalities. It's based on the need of the local municipality. Sometimes it's just covering a vacancy or providing as-needed advice or go to meetings. Sometimes if the municipality would like us in the office, for some we're in their office 1 to 2 days a week. This is provided on a cost recovery basis, and the local municipality provides administrative support under the shared service agreement. So we've been providing planning to South Dundas since 2021. We're in their office 2 days a week. We attend most of the council meetings. We provide training. They currently have a vacant position, full-time position, and they've requested that the service agreement be amended to have the counties provide the staff person and administrative technical support. So if council directs us, we'd work with municipality to make sure that job description meets their needs and update the contract for planning services. Just as noted in the financial section, is provided on a cost recovery basis, and we charge an all-inclusive hourly rate. So example, a staff person might be paid $30 an hour, but we charge out $45 to the municipality to reflect some of those extra costs. I'd be happy to take any questions from council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I understand that this is on the request of South Dundas. Is that correct?
Yes, their councils approached us, and we've been working closely with them for many years, and Stephanie has been leading the planning service over there. So this is kind of the arrangement that we thought would work best for their needs.
It's a little unusual. It seems to me that, you know, if they need a staff person, they should hire a staff person. I'm just a little concerned about amending the agreement, in that it could be a slippery slope. All of a sudden, we've got the counties having staff in our municipal offices when it should be municipal staff being in municipal offices with the support of the county. I think that was the spirit originally of the agreement, and I think switching that up really does change the spirit, and I'm just concerned about it because, you know, things can be a slippery slope in terms of then, you know, developing other relationships where you all of a sudden the county is, you know, in municipal offices more and more. Thank you.
I can speak to that through the
Sure,
warden.
go ahead.
Currently for two of our municipalities, and actually 3 this year, we are in the municipal offices regularly at their request. So Stephanie's there 2 days a week. I'm in North Stormont usually 1 day a week. And Megan was in North Dundas helping out for a vacancy. We also have that with some of our other services regularly in the municipal offices. Previously, I worked at Frontenac County, and some of their IT and GIS staff actually ended up being based in the municipal office just to avoid all the driving back and forth to help fix someone's computer, things like that. So it's definitely something that we are providing now, and the other municipalities also provide. I think from the municipality's perspective, it's nice having someone in the office that's always available, and we have a large planning team. There's 4 of us with at least 10 years experience that are all on our team that can back that person up if they're not available. Again, because the level of service is different for the different municipalities, we do make sure that is offered on a cost recovery basis so that the levy isn't paying if we're giving South Dundas a higher level of service based on their needs versus another municipality who would have a separate person that's paying through their fees and levies. So definitely understand where you're coming from, that this is the level of service provided is different, but our agreements kind of right now are structured that way, that it's based on the needs of each local municipality, recognizing that there's some things that are paid through the levy or through planning application fees, and some things are paid directly by the local municipality.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Densham, then Councillor Lang, then Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And I was glad to hear the cost recovery includes more than just the basic salary. There's an administrative portion of that that's covered on top of that, so that's good. But I had exactly the same concern when I read through this. I wondered how much this was precedent setting. And I agree. From our perspective, North Stormont's perspective, we benefit, absolutely. But we see the county's support more as supplementary to our current staff. If we had a role whereby we required a full-time staff 100% of the time, the model as I understood it, and I think Councillor Williams confirmed it, is that fundamentally it's up to the municipal staff to kind of own and administer that position. So it's not that I'm against the concept, it just feels like it becomes somewhat precedent setting. We could start looking at things for, economic development, planning, financial services, et cetera, et cetera. This opens up a potential big door for this type of thing. And I think that maybe requires a bigger discussion than just kind of in the moment making a decision to understand whether or not that's the direction all of council wants to go. That's my thought on this. At this point, I see it more as precedent setting and needs a greater conversation to support.
Councillor Lang, then Councillor Bergeron, then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, through you. I had similar concerns. I won't repeat what they have said. We do need a CEO right now, though. But anyway, no, my concern was that right now we're supplying 2 days a week, by the sounds of it, and council meetings. So my question maybe for South Dundas is, you guys are now looking for full-time planning. You're going from 2 days a week. You need a planner now 5 days a week, and if that's the case, like, we're already supplying 2, so it doesn't sound like we need a full-time person here. It sounds like, we're adding a person to this department, but if they're not going to be using the person 5 days a week, I'm confused exactly how this is going to play out and what's happening to the 2 days a week we were already having. That should be surplus then at this point. So 2 days plus council meeting, close to 3 days likely.
And sorry, through the warden, there is a vacant position right now in South Dundas. So they do have a full-time position, but instead of that person being township staff, it would be recruited and hired by the county. So it would be the current full-time position plus any additional work from senior planning staff that we're providing. So it's not an additional person, it's just who they're reporting to and kind of how they're being trained and how the structure is going.
Subsequent question?
Yes, thank you. So they have a vacant position, but we do not. But we are adding a full-time staff person to our department. Is that not correct? I'm just reading it. It says the creation of an additional position in the Planning Economic Development Department.
Yes, through the warden, that's correct. So and it would be funded by the municipality of South Dundas as well.
I think we might need to talk about this a little more. I'm not 100%.
Okay. Councillor Bergeron?
Okay, I think my initial question was partly through you. My question was a full-time new position to cover several municipalities like you're doing, or just for one municipality? And if it's just for the one municipality, then they should be getting, in my opinion, their own staff instead of going through the counties. Did you understand that?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go Councillor McDonald, then to Councillor Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So I think that just as a municipality that currently receives this service in general, I was just going to make comments that I think the service from the county is excellent and we really benefit as small municipalities. These are not easy jobs or positions to recruit for, especially in smaller rural areas and with the current expectations that some of these positions have, i.e. some people want to work fully remotely and it's difficult sometimes to retain these staff. We also have a ton of housing pressure right now, and I know there's a lot going on in South Dundas where they probably need this to be dealt with in a timely fashion, so I respect that as well. And I would say that I agree it probably is a bigger conversation, but I think it's, at least from my perspective, seems like a very positive thing where we can support each other in this way generally for these types of positions. And as one of the smallest municipalities, I think we will need to do more of that, not less, in the future.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mr. Warden. Agreed. I'm glad to hear Councillor Densham, Councillor Lang indicate you'd like to make this a broader picture because Councillor McDonald is correct. We started our strategic planning over a year ago, and we have passed through official motion our strategic plan, and one of the items was collaboration and to collaborate more, and I believe we have not done enough of that at all, and I think it's time we move forward. I think this is a great opportunity in the planning department for succession planning, that the planners, and the skill set that future planners are going to need at the county level need lower tier municipal experience, and this was a great opportunity and is a great opportunity for someone to start out at the lowest level, work through the lower tiers, and move to a higher tier through succession planning. Being that we are the coaches, so Councillor Williams indicated that we are to coach in the planning department, and that's exactly what this position would be. The county level planners, the leaders would be that person's coach. So happy to have further conversations in strategic planning, tourism, roads, all the places that there's lots of overlap and or duplication to follow our strategic plan of 2024-27 of collaboration at all levels.
Okay, thank you. Councillor St. Pierre?
Thank you, and through you, Warden. I follow, obviously, Councillor Broad's words, but I think the reality is when I look at this room and you just introduced all of your planning team here, there's 5. I challenge any small municipality to go out and try to get 5 planners these days. I think the reality is we go through development applications, and the counties are the first ones we have to submit our applications to. They're the primary reviewers of any development application. So in our sense, it only makes sense to add on to the planning team, which I think actually, to be quite frank, this is kind of a pilot project in our mind, and we don't mind being first on the pilot project. And I think there's an opportunity with all the growth that's is happening and going to occur through SDG that the planning departments need to be probably one of our strongest departments we have at the county level. And I think it's support. We talk about supporting. I think it is a direct support by, proposing to add one more employee to go with and work with the counties directly for South Dundas and other municipalities if they so choose or if you so choose. I don't believe in if it fits here, everybody else is going to want it. And you know what, that's a risk I think we're willing to take. I just think this is a great opportunity to grow something that has been started and will be a direct benefit to not only South Dundas, but could be a direct benefit to other municipalities as well in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor that we need to vote on regardless. There is an option that, I've heard people want more discussion, that we could have a committee of the whole in July. I know that the township wants to get moving on this, so I think that if we were going to do it, it would have to be in July. And there might be a couple other issues we need to duck. I mean, I know we had a quick discussion about entrances, the entrance bylaw at the summit, so that, those could be two items that we could discuss that day. But I am prepared. We do have a motion on the floor that we need to vote on. Well, we can vote on deferral. But I will call the vote. And go ahead, Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And I know there seems to be a movement towards deferral, and we don't often do it at this table or your table. The deferral. So I'm not sure how it is actually. Does someone suggest a deferral, or does the Madam Clerk suggest a deferral?
Through you, Mr. Warden, someone would put forward a motion to defer. It's a secondary motion.
You're putting a motion forward to defer?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I would, in order to allow for more discussion on this issue so that we can all get on the same page, and it would be better than potentially defeating it, I believe.
Councillor Broad, you guys are good? Okay, so I'm going to put forward a motion, we'll put forward a motion to defer. All those in favor?
We'll need a seconder, Mr. Warden.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Bergeron. Oh, you're seconding it, okay. Seconded by Councillor Bergeron. All those in favor of deferral? Opposed? You have to vote some way. You're for it? Okay. Okay, thank you. And we'll set up a meeting ASAP, maybe not the first week of July. The second week of July would work if that works with everyone else, as long as we have a good portion of county council available. So, okay, great. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, South Dundas, for being in favor of that. Okay, moving on to County Library, Communications and Marketing Coordinator position. Welcome, Rebecca.
It's moved by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor Bergeron, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry approve that the contract position of Communications and Marketing Coordinator for the SDG Library be transitioned to a full-time position effective immediately.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca.
Thank you. The Communications and Marketing Coordinator is responsible for the execution of various marketing strategies for SDG Library and for providing support with public and community relations, internal communications, social media, website presence, and the media. So back in 2022, the SDG Library completed a service delivery review, and within this review, it was recommended that the position of Communications and Marketing Coordinator be reinstated. So last July, the position was filled, but it was filled in a temporary measure under a one-year contract, and it is expiring as of July 19th of this year. It was brought forward to the SDG Library Board back in May 23, so just a month ago, and it was unanimously supported by the board, and it was also budgeted for in the 2024 budget. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to assist.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Dencham.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and I definitely support this person's going to be very busy based on the list that you have. My question is more around So what I see is a broad list of tasks, but I'm trying to understand, or would love to understand, from a marketing perspective, what's the benefit? Like, what's the measurable? What are the results that we're hoping to see as a result of all of these tasks?
Through you, Mr. Warden. So what I have here is just accomplishments, not necessarily tasks. It goes kind of above and beyond in terms of what this person did with the role and made it their own in terms of a creativity and communication standpoint. In terms of deliverable tasks that we're looking at really just increasing the awareness. So we have these communication and marketing plans that are created every year, and within these plans, we have set deliverables, tasks, and objectives that we set target goals towards achieving through our communications and marketing coordinator position. So it involves outreach, it involves community presence, reaching out to media sources for just exposure within local newspapers, social media posts. You'll notice on the county council reports how many times we have conducted social media presence and the number of people that are targeted and, I guess, viewed. Yeah.
Okay, subsequent?
Subsequent, yeah. So, but are there any goals in terms of increasing readership or borrowing or things like that that would ultimately tell you that those programs have been successful?
Through you, Mr. Warden, I suppose that there is. That falls a little bit more under the community librarian's position in terms of really getting people engaged in the programs. But yes, we do track the number of attendance through our different programs. We look at how many attend, how many visit, how many are engaged within the programs. So there is that component, yes.
Thank you. I know it's I know it's a tough thing to measure. That's what I used to do in my career. So, but it's important to understand that you're getting value for it. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Broad.
Thank you through you, Mr. Warden, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Landry if he's here, and Councillor Fraser would definitely know how many times I talk about measurements and how we're going to measure all the activities within the library board. So in the last 14 months since our board has started, we have been trying to get to a baseline post-COVID to start our tracking, and we will see significant changes in the way we describe our work at the library board with the statistical graphs and measurements, and then moving towards what our goals would be. So this position would fall under having that data to know where we've been at. But our first nature of business has been to set a baseline, and the board has been coaching Rebecca on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Warden, and to piggyback to Councillor Broad and in fairness to Councillor Densham, I look forward to the excitement level that Councillor Broad spoke about, demonstrated the first opportunity we had to see the graphs, the charts, and see the statistics, and he has been a champion of making sure that was included in this effort to enhance our presence in SDG, and it's done well. Even I understand what's going on now, and it works well. But the number of engagements that our communications, our contract communications person has gathered, it's enormous, and that's one of the goals of the SDG library, is to increase the presence in SDG. And I hate to say the communications person is a tool, but it is a definite tool needed in our toolbox if we want to improve and expand our presence in SDG. And I look forward to maybe at a future meeting some of these stats being presented and the graphs, and then we can all enjoy seeing the benefits of having a person such as our communications made full-time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No further questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you, Rebecca. Moving on to tenders and quotations, supply and delivery of bulk coarse rock salt.
It's moved by Councillor Densham, seconded by Councillor McGillis, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry award the tender for the multi-year supply and delivery of bulk coarse rock salt to Cargill Salt for their unit rates for 1 year, totaling $4,650,073, with the cost of material being $93.38 per ton, plus delivery charges to various locations, and that the Manager of Operations be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract.
Thank you. Trevor?
Good morning, Council. Yes, so in front of you is a report to award our salt tender, which I think is very timely. I'm sure everyone, like myself, woke up and looked at this week's forecast thinking, how are we going to keep the ice off the roads? So, but as noted in the report, looking at awarding this tender, it is a joint tender. All municipalities in the region participate on and benefit from the volume discounts that they can get as they would not be able to get on their own. So it's a joint tender administered by the county. Of note, you'll see South Glengarry was omitted as an error in the tendering process, but we have confirmed with the supplier that absolutely they will honor their rate and provide the pricing for South Glengarry. So if this is awarded, we'll immediately follow up with a change order on that for that process. As far as costs go, it's noted as well, you'll see we're down about 1.5% as a net for the material delivered to site. It's a raw material, cost has gone down. Probably no surprise to anybody though, trucking costs have gone up quite a bit. Cost of diesel and everything else, it's just the way the world is these days. But what's nice about this tender is the way it's structured. With salt being a bulk commodity and having its own market kind of thing, we've got some pricing stability for future years. We know our costs. If the market tanks, we can go out to tender again for year 3 and 4. And if it booms, we've got pricing secured so we can get some budget stability. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay. Thank you. And don't worry, South Glengarry gets omitted a lot, so don't worry about that. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. None opposed? Liquid chloride salt additive tender.
It's moved by Councillor Bergeron, seconded by Councillor Fraser, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry award the tender to Dali Services Incorporated to supply calcium chloride salt pre-wetting agent at their unit prices totaling $192,780 for year 1 and $202,000 for year 2, and that the Manager of Operations be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract.
Thank you. Trevor.
Yeah, so another tender award as we look forward to winter maintenance operations. This material is the material that goes on board on the truck that we actually use to pre-wet the salt to reduce bounce and scatter of the material, increases its effectiveness. It's also the material we use in our tanks that we bought several years ago for when we put the liquid directly on the road. And that's what we've been using this material. Just as a note for council, staff is investigating looking into using brine, straight salt brine for that application if we can source the material or potentially make it ourselves in future years. So just kind of where we're looking going forward as far as technologies advance.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. None opposed. Thanks, Trevor. Moving on to 15-163, replacement of Wirt Culvert. Mike. Oh, sorry.
Yep. It's moved by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor McDonald, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry accept the tender from Clarence MacDonald Excavation Limited for the box culvert replacement at the total price of $155,012.50 plus HST, and that the Manager of Infrastructure be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you. This is a routine box culvert replacement. It's in budget. It will require the closure of the road for probably about a week, and it's at end of life. It's been at end of life since 2019 OSIM, so it's due for replacement.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councillor Densham.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thanks, Mike. Just one question on the budget. There's budgeted $300,000. Is that just for the replacement, or was that the replacement plus the purchase of the box itself? Because I think we bought we already bought the box, so whatever the cost of the box plus the $155. How do I look at it? I guess is the question.
I hadn't given you the price of the box because of the way the pre-purchase tender was structured. If I had given you the price of that box, it would have made public the winning bidders' unit rates, which is something that we keep confidential here. So the price for the pre-purchase for the 2 box culverts, the first one being the Wirt culvert and the second one being the Crooks McLeod, came in well under our kind of aggregate estimate for both. And so when I take out the price for the Wirt and I take the installation tender cost here, we would be within budget for that box culvert.
Okay, thank you. Further questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried, none opposed. Thanks, Mike. Moving on to bylaws, 8.1, records retention bylaw.
It's moved by Councillor Densham, seconded by Councillor Fraser, that bylaw number 5449, being a bylaw to provide a schedule of retention periods for the records of the Corporation of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Okay, thank you, and I believe you're going to speak to that.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden, here at the counties, we've recently implemented a new electronic records management system, and as part of this process, an updated records retention bylaw is now being recommended. The current one that we have in place right now is from the 1970s, so we want to bring it in line with TOMRIMS, which is the Ontario Municipal Records Management System. It's the standard across the province, so that's what this bylaw here is proposing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Procedure bylaw amendment, election of warden timeline.
It's moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Williams, that bylaw number 5450, being a bylaw to govern the proceedings of council and its committees, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Okay, thank you, and I believe you're going to speak to this.
Yep, thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. Direction was provided at our last Committee of the Whole meeting back in 2023 now to shift the timeline for the election of wardens. So leading up to the election this year, we have a procedural bylaw amendment before you to shift that timeline. Members would submit their interest in serving in the position of warden at the next meeting in July, and then in August, the election would formally take place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor McGillis.
A member of council, thank you. A member of council knows in advance he won't be able to be at that meeting. Could he make that mention in advance prior to that meeting for the warden?
Through you, Mr. Warden, our bylaw does state that they have to be at the meeting, serving as a member to express interest, but you could definitely join the meeting virtually, call in, Zoom in. I don't think that would be a problem. We would accommodate you.
Okay.
I'll be on a cruise ship, though I hope that... yeah, that's right. I'll be back by that, hopefully by that time, unless the boat's delayed.
Okay. Okay. Councillor Densham.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I was reading through the documents, and something came to mind, and I wondered whether or not we need to be thinking about this. But the deputy warden right now is the past warden, and I'm wondering whether or not we should be considering that the warden-elect who comes on in August should become the deputy warden for that period of time, because they will be adopting the role, or whether we should stay with the past warden. So it's more a question than...
I believe when I started, and maybe that the deputy warden was voted on, and the deputy warden became the next one. So you're actually voting on a deputy warden that would become the warden, and you had the election for deputy warden every year, as opposed to the warden. And in the first year of the term, and this would have been before my time, they would have, I believe, voted both, depending on the election. So if the deputy warden was not reelected, you would have to have another election. So
he's right.
Something. Go ahead, Councillor Fraser.
If we're exchanging thoughts on it, if I may, Mr. Warden, I think of the busyness of maybe not the election process that goes on behind us, behind you, Mr. Warden, but the busyness at the table vying for positions, and it'd be an extra little bit of busyness whenever, in essence, there is an established procedure to seamlessly have a deputy warden in place. And my thoughts on it are that we do have many other things that take lots of time, and if this is one thing that continues in a streamlined fashion, I feel it's appropriate as it stands. Thank you.
It's appropriate as it stands right now? Okay, thank you. Further questions or comments on this? Yes. Okay. Well, we have a motion on the table. I will call the vote on it. All those in favor of the amendment on the procedure bylaw. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Any opposed? I didn't see one hand go up, but okay. There are none opposed. Motion is carried. Thank you, everyone. So moving on to 8.3, OPA number 23, Major Open Space.
It's moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Broad, that bylaw number 5451, being a bylaw to adopt official plan amendment number 23 to the official plan of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So just in the interest of time, I'll give a very quick update for everybody on OPA number 23 for the Major Open Space Land Use Designation. So on February 20th, the Council endorsed this OPA and directed staff to initiate the process. As a reminder, this OPA is to permit the Major Open Space Land Use Designation in rural areas, as well as redesignate some key sites that are municipally owned. By permitting this land use designation in rural areas, it will provide further protection on lands that to avoid potential redevelopment of it or development generally. After endorsement, the proposed amendments were reviewed at the SDG Planners Group meeting on April 10th. Following this meeting, staff finalized the changes and then scheduled a public meeting, which was held here in Council Chambers on June 4th. After the public meeting, county staff did have a meeting with ministry staff in order to provide further clarification on the proposed amendment itself, as they were concerned with some of the lands that currently have an agricultural resource land use designation. Essentially, they wanted to ensure that that land use designation, the official plan policies, those lands would still be subjected to them, if just be subject to them in generally. So therefore, as a result, additional wording was added to the final bylaw, which is being reviewed today or considered for adoption. If adopted today, then staff will proceed with the notice of adoption as well as the 20-day appeal period.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried, none opposed. Thank you. 2024 insurance renewal.
It's moved by Councillor Fraser, seconded by Councillor Williams, that bylaw number 5452, being a bylaw to authorize the acceptance of the municipal insurance program from Marsh and the cyber insurance renewal from CFC for the period July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025 at a total premium of $236,566 plus applicable taxes be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Thank you. Welcome, Rebecca.
Good morning, everybody. So the annual municipal liability insurance and cyber renewal is for the period of July 1st to June 30th the following year. The proposal for the next year is $236,566. This year, we are seeing a 6% increase over the prior year, which is about $14,513. This is solely due to the municipal liability package, as the cyber coverage remains the same. So I was pleasantly surprised about the increase being 6%. I was estimating about 12%, so we are within budget. So if I have any questions regarding the insurance proposal.
Go ahead, Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, through you. Yes, very happy myself to see the rate was not as much as I expected, not as much as mine was. But anyway, it maybe a sign that we're doing some things right here. I did have a question, and my question was just on the executive overview, going through it, and I just kind of skimmed through it quickly, and I noticed that page 4, it says that we've gone from 74 units under our automobile insurance to 82 units, so an increase of 8 units. I just wondered if you could maybe address that, whether there's some units that we're keeping on for a year or two that were scheduled to be replaced, or what's happening there.
So with our insurance renewal for the 12-month period, there's often some timing changes. So if we add on any vehicles within our insurance year, they're part of the insurance renewal and will be added to the next policy as part of our fleet. There's sometimes some delays when we go to Gov Deals and sell additional fleet. Last year we did add the sweeper that we purchased, the ATV for the forestry and the a corporate vehicle. But we do have, and I think we held on to the plow additionally for an additional year, and I think the municipality was using it, so that was added to our fleet. Normally that would have been sold. But we do have some delays. We did have some delays with selling some fleet in Gov Deals, but our fleet has not changed. It is, except for the 3 that I mentioned, we do have some plow going out to Gov Deals, some pickups, and some flail mowers as well. So it's mostly a timing.
Go ahead, follow up.
All right. Thank you. That satisfies me, but maybe just kind of double check with them that they didn't get it wrong then, because they should have had the sweeper and so forth in our 23-24 policy. So just make sure that they haven't messed up, that we're actually not 8 vehicles more than we were last year.
Understood.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor McGillis.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. This is our deductible status quo, and what is it? What is our deductible?
Our deductible is $25,000. Should council want to look at reducing premiums, there is a possibility that we can review the deductible and increase it, and it would assist us with reducing the premiums, but I can't say by how much. I know a couple of years ago, it must have been about, I want to say about 5 years ago, we did increase it to 25 to assist with the premiums. But as of right now, the policy as presented is status quo.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor McDonald.
Just on the premium side, because that's always interesting, would you say there are a lot of things that happen to us that are between the $50,000 and $25,000 level? Because like we can always be over-insuring. I know insurance won't say that, but like if we have one thing that's $5,000 over 25, we could be paying more than $5,000 to cover something that doesn't rarely happen, or rarely happens, I should say. So in that regard, like, do you think we're adequately covered, over-covered? And maybe that's not a fair question for now, so you can not answer it if it's hard to answer.
That's a difficult question to answer because I don't have a crystal ball. I don't foresee what claims could be coming, which we would benefit from having it like this. But I do know that the coverage is, it's good to have the coverage that we have, and we have good policies and procedures in place that allow us to mitigate any liability. And we've been really good at maintaining our our road system, our internal controls for our cyber, things like that.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Continue on. That was it for you? Okay. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Motion is carried, none opposed. Okay, removal of the 0.3 meter reserve for entrance. Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor McDonald, that bylaw number 5453, being a bylaw for the purpose of removing a 0.3 meter reserve, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Thank you. Welcome, Derek.
Good morning, and through you, Mr. Warden. This here is just a simple request to remove a 1-foot reserve to grant an entrance on County Road 21, kind of northeast of Alexandria. This is a result of a severance that went through about 30 years ago, where they were granted severance with a joint entrance. But when they processed the severance, the landowners requested permission to maintain the existing entrance and drive through the field to the newly severed property. So now that somebody's bought the property, obviously they don't want to drive through the farmer's field, nor does the farmer want them driving through the field. So he's requesting permission to remove the reserve so they can put the entrance where it should be.
Thank you. Any questions? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Maxville Manor updated funding agreement.
It's moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Bergeron, that bylaw number 5454, being a bylaw to authorize a funding agreement between the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry and the Maxville Manor, be read and passed in open session, signed and sealed.
Thank you. Madam CEO.
Through you, Mr. Warden, I'm bringing forward a slightly revised agreement for the Maxville Manor It is very consistent with the Dundas Manor. The two components that I'd like to bring your attention to is, one, the funding contribution from the counties has been increased from $2.5 million to $4 million. And then also from a financing perspective, the original agreement that was drafted a few years ago, the funding was going to be provided through phases of construction. And similar to the change that we made for the Dundas Manor, we're going to provide that funding for construction upfront, either when the tender is awarded or when it is required by the financial institution to be able to get the project off the ground. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Items under the consent agenda.
It's moved by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor Fraser, that all items listed under the consent agenda section of the agenda be approved as presented.
Any discussions? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to boards and committee. Joint liaison, we did not have a meeting. It was reported on in the May meeting. So, library board. Councillor Broad.
Sure, thank you, through you, Warden. Yeah, we had our May meeting was in Iroquois, the lovely home of South Dundas, where we reviewed our statistical data and looked at our measurements, our finances. We officially passed our new facility policy. We had an update from our chairperson, Margaret, who had attended the Ontario Library Services Assembly meeting. We discussed the marketing position, which you heard earlier today. And of course, we continue to talk about the exciting event coming up on October 7th in Avonmore in North Stormont for the conclusion of SDG Reads. So hopefully people have purchased their novels or have borrowed their novels and can read the book and prelude to the event in October.
Thank you, Councillor. Police Services Board.
We have a meeting the morning of July 17th, and I'll see you there.
Okay, thank you. Eastern Ontario Health Unit. No update. Glenstore Dunn Lodge.
Next meeting this Wednesday.
Thank you. St. Lawrence River Institute.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you, the St. Lawrence River Institute had its AGM at the end of May. I'm happy to announce that Mike Pescott was appointed as the new chair, and we welcome 2 new board members, being Dina Rozo and Katie Russell. Additionally, the financial statements were reported, and it was a clean audit opinion. I do want to note that the budget for the board has increased over the last 10 years from about $1 million to over $2 million. Most of this is fundraising, so it just goes to the efforts of staff to obtain grants and secure private funding. Finally, I want to note that this year's River Award went to Patricia O'Hara for her work with the Great River Network over the last few years. Thank you.
Thanks for your report. Municipal Advisory, Raisin South Nation Source Water. No meeting. No meeting, Councillor Fraser. Eastern Ontario Agri-Food Network, Councillor Williams.
Just to note that the organization is putting some renewed efforts into building the membership of the organization, getting small producers on side as members so that they can increase their revenue stream. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Regional Incentive Program Approvals Committee, no meeting. Rural Education Committee, Councillor St. Pierre.
Nothing new to report. We still have to set a date for our next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Social Development Council, no meeting. SDG, nothing. All right, moving on to key information reports, official plan amendment, rural consent policies update.
Through you, Mr. Warden, just a very quick update as well for OPA number 24. So this item was to endorse at the February 20th meeting by County Council. It was also reviewed, the proposed amendments at the time were also reviewed at the SDG Planners Group meeting, which took place on April 10th. Following this meeting, some of the amendments that were being considered at that time or that are currently under consideration is to reset the lot of existence. We are looking to reset it to January 1st of 2024 for all municipalities, or by a given date based on where the local councils like to have a reset to. in addition to the resetting of the date of lot of existence, we are also going to permit up to 2 real severances per lot and may consider 1 additional severance per lot. However, that would only be considered if the property meets certain criteria, as well as may be subject to additional requirements before it could be considered. Part of this OPA will also include an update and review of surplus resident dwellings in rural agricultural areas to ensure that it aligns with the new provincial planning statement, which was recently released. So after discussing these items at our April 10th meeting, the local planners group, they requested additional time for them to update their local councils about the proposed amendments that I just summarized for you. My understanding is that most councils have been updated or are anticipated to be updated by the end of this month. So generally, all local councils are in favor of the amendments. However, we'll continue to work with our local partners to ensure that we are addressing their needs, as we do have the opportunity to tailor it. And following this, once all the councils have been updated, we will continue with the OPA process, plan and schedule a public meeting, hopefully in July, as well as proceed with bringing forward a bylaw later this summer.
Okay, thank you for your report. Councilor Bergeron.
The Township of North Dundas, we went over this, and we had voted in our municipality to keep the date at 2006 because we have lots or residences or land along rural roads which are gravel, and we don't want to see more and more individual residences on those roads which will complain about the dust and the farm traffic and so forth. So what I'd like to understand is, if the counties decides to say 2024, does that mean our vote didn't mean anything? Because we really don't want to see it at 2024.
Through you, Mr. Warden, no. So if the local council does not want to reset their date to the date that's being suggested, it is really just a suggestion. We do have the opportunity to write in our official plan a specific date for the individual municipality. Currently, we have 3, so we do have that opportunity to make it work for the local municipality's needs.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, through you. Glad to see this coming forward. Personally, I'm okay with the 2024 because extra houses mean extra taxes. Maybe you'll be able to fix those roads. But the thing I wanted to comment on was the surplus residential dwellings. And when you first brought this to us a month or 2 ago, whenever it was, that wasn't mentioned at the time. So the surplus residential dwellings typically, I feel, affects farmland. I assume that's where this is heading here, that a farm person buys a farm or whatever the case may be, they have the ability to sever that surplus dwelling because for the most part we don't want to be landlords, we want to be farming, we don't want to be looking after houses and tenants and so forth. So the change would be that the building would have had to have been in existence for at least 10 years, and I think that's a little high. I'm just going to mention it now, I don't think this is the place there is public meetings and so forth to talk about this stuff, but I just want to bring it to everybody's attention. I think I know where you're going with this, to try to slow down the farmer's ability to build a house, then sever that to get around the severance or the consent thing. Checked with our planner, it's only happened twice in 18 years in our township, and I know where both of those buildings are, and both of them are in places that are zoned ag land, but they're not great farmland. So I don't see that there's a big problem to change that to 10 years. Just wanted to mention it, and definitely maybe make the public meeting and put our comments in.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you. Moving on to 11.2, Increment Bridge Condition Update.
Thank you, Warden. It's that time of year. We just had another inspection on the Inkerman Bridge at the end of May, and as with the previous inspections, the degradation has been deemed stable, so the girders are not, showing accelerating degradation. At this time, we're recommending that we continue to delay that project until early 2025. I think we would be staff would be coming to council with the tender and recommending to proceed in 2025. So at this time, between that project and the other bridge projects that we have put out so far to date in 2024, we're sitting on a sufficient surplus to tackle another structure that we have been keeping our eye on. When we did the bus tour, we went up to County Road 24 at the border with Prescott Russell. We have the Crooks McLeod culvert. And we didn't go inside, but there is a picture in the report that shows you what the condition of the concrete is in that culvert. And staff are recommending that we proceed with that culvert using surplus money with what we have left in the construction season. The box has been pre-purchased. We'd like to tender it, determine what it'll cost, and come back to you with a recommendation either way at the next council meeting if we can.
That sounds good to me. Let's get some more work done. Questions or comments? We're all good with that? Okay, good. June 2024 update speed limit reviews. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as you may recall, I believe it was the November 20th regular council meeting. Ben was sitting here and the request was made to review the speed limits around settlement areas, particularly with references to safe zones, business areas, and some of the transition zones that we may or may not have around the county. So I undertook a review of every settlement area in the county with a county road passing through it. The speed limits on those zones, the existing speed limits, I reviewed them against the Highway Traffic Act definition for a built-up area. I reviewed them against the Transportation Association of Canada's speed limit warrant worksheet. Shortly after commencing this study, I received some correspondence from some residents with concerns about the speed limit in front of the school in their area. So I also undertook to review the speed limit in front of schools that weren't already within a 50 kilometer per hour zone. And then as I was closing up all of those areas, I checked against the previous speed bylaw and noted that there were some areas that weren't settlement areas that had already had speed limit controls out front. So just for the sake of it, I added all of those areas to the study as well, so that we have a comprehensive, essentially a comprehensive review of all of the speed zones that were in existence already. So attached to the report is a list of my recommended speed zones. There are a lot of new ones. One thing that the study kind of shed light on was that we didn't have the transition zones everywhere in accordance with sort of the best practices that we like to apply. There were still a lot of areas where we went from an 80 kilometer zone down to a 50 kilometer zone with no intermediate step of either a 70 or a 60. I also looked forward in time. I know that there are intents within some of the municipalities to have 40 kilometer per hour speed zones within settlement areas, including on county roads. I know that there was a discussion that this would save the municipalities money in that there would be far less signage required to implement those zones. And so the emphasis was put on having the 60 kilometer per hour transition zones rather than the 70 kilometer per hour transition zones, so that you would be going 80, 60, 40 if those were ever put in place, as opposed to 80, 70, and then you would need something between the 70 and the 40, as then you, again, would still have a 30 kilometer per hour jump. Overall, my findings were that a lot of the existing settlement areas with 50 kilometer per hour speed zones are already somewhat over controlled. A good percentage of them came out, and 50 kilometers per hour was the existing speed limit and 50 kilometers per hour was the recommended speed limit. But there were many where 50 kilometers per hour was the proposed, the existing speed limit, and they did not count as a built-up area under the Highway Traffic Act, and the Transportation Association of Canada's recommendations were 60 kilometers per hour. For those areas, I don't believe we should be trying to bump up the speed limit through the entire settlement area. I don't think that that's going to be a popular suggestion. But as we look to implement the transition zones where there are none, I believe that that transition zone does have to keep with the local density. And so in some locations where I'm recommending a transition zone, it borders slightly into the 50 zone and slightly into the 80 zone. So there might be a couple of houses there where they were 50, but they're going up to 60. But we have the expectation that people are kind of minding the speed limit as they're coming into the village and slowing down further out, and they should be doing the 60 in front of their house as opposed to now where maybe they start slowing down at the 50 sign and they were doing 100 out in the 80 zone. So we can look at these zones and certainly look at what we expect to happen out there, and of course, it's not final. If we put these if we were to make these changes, we could of course come back to the drawing board afterwards and shift things out just to make sure that we are seeing the speeds that we're looking for across businesses and residences. So at this time, I'm providing council with the list. I'm not looking for an endorsement at this time. This is sort of a disclosure of the findings. I'm looking for input, comments over at least the coming weeks. Questions, we can discuss specific locations that in each of your respective municipalities, and review it, an extra set of eyes, and then we would come back again at a subsequent meeting for further discussion, and then perhaps even later in the year, look towards adopting as we come to a consensus on all of these locations and speeds, etc.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Councillor McGillis?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. I was just wondering if it was maybe more prudent after our committee of the whole meeting, give you more direction in terms of what the speed limits should be in terms of the changes in the housing, in terms, regarding the 5 laneways and 1 kilometer. That has a lot to do with the speed to keep the continuous flow the traffic flowing. So I'm just wondering if we could just take a look at this first, what we're doing there, and then that would allow for looking at what our speed limits should be. That's my concern.
Okay. Go ahead.
So my understanding is that you would want to wait on further discussion on this review, and then council would give me a direction at some point to come back for further discussion when you're ready.
I think what he's referring to is just that if we made a change to the 5 entrance bylaw per kilometer, I think it's 5.
It depends on the traffic counts on that section of road. It's
Right.
either 3 or 5.
Right, that we would come back with maybe that we'd have to do some decreases in speed, which of course, that's exactly what you don't want to happen. But I think that we can still do an overall look at the current, what they've recommended at this point, and then if we have to make any, if you need to come back with any recommendations after, if we did make some kind of change, that we could do it then. Is everybody okay with that? That we, if anybody, so what you're asking is basically individual townships have a look at it, call with individual questions, and then, because it does really affect our local townships as opposed to the people within the county. So everyone good with that? Go ahead, Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Thank you, Mr. Jans, for the presentation. I guess, giving notice to all in the room that in the 2024 budget for North Dundas, we budgeted for that, what Mr. Jans is referring to, the whole community or the settlement area. Thank you, Mr. Jans. The settlement area being 40. So just to give everyone a heads up, we're moving towards that quickly. So I'm not sure about timelines or anything like that. I'm not sure when equipment arrives, and I know there's a process, but at our end, we bought into the idea that, and if Mr. Jans has time, Mr. Warden, he can talk about the importance of 40K.
Are you threatening us?
No threats at all. Just
Okay.
This is the way we're moving. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions at this point? Go ahead, Councillor St. Pierre.
Yeah, thank you. And just very quickly through you, Warden, we talked about that ribbon development. I think you and Derek McMillan's talked about that quite a bit on, and it goes the same line of what the two councillors or Councillor McGinnis said. It would be nice to know additional development that can occur through these transition points with the reduced speed and whatnot. And I think if I'm on the right track on this ribbon development, and that would encourage potential additional driveways or permit driveway locations and further development or increased development through these areas?
So from my perspective, the additional driveways is the ribbon development, and then that corresponds to additional roadside hazards and built-up density that encourages reduced speed limits. So when we're trying to maintain an efficient network where somebody can get on at one village and get to the next village as fast as they can, or safe speeds, obviously, but we were not looking to suppress the speed limit on every section of every county road to encourage development, so that when people use our road network, it gets them to their destination, it gets their goods and services to their destination. We don't want to become a hindrance to the economy in that way. When I think of further development and getting houses built, I look at, I've got a couple of names in North Dundas off the top of my head here, so I'm going to make reference to those, but I'm looking at Harmony. I'm looking at the Thompson subdivision outside of Chesterville. These are developments that occurred off the county road with municipal road access coming in. So in my meeting with Ben DeHaan and Jamie at North Dundas, there was the discussion about how 40 kilometers per hour could come to every single settlement area. Harmony came up. The County Road 31 cuts right through. There's a bit of an S-bend there, but the residential development is off the county road with municipal road access only. From my perspective, it doesn't make sense to have a section of 40 kilometers per hour on County Road 31. You can have that be the 80 kilometer per hour corridor, and as soon as you turn off into the residential areas, that's suppressed to 40. And certainly those subdivisions off the county road have significantly less impact on the county road system in terms of roadside hazards, the number of pedestrians using our road if they're able to get their recreational activities accomplished inside their subdivisions or with connections through forests or other amenities, then we're able to maintain and justify the higher speed limit on the road. So when I look at the topic of balancing the road network connectivity with further development, that's what I'm hoping to see more of in the future, because if we start with the settlement areas that we have, and we only build on the county roads coming out or the township roads, that are also coming out of those settlement areas, we tend to the shape of the settlement area starts to resemble more of a star with wings at that point, whereas I'm looking for something that's more like it's like a clover leaf is essentially, right? Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Last question. Go ahead, Councillor Williams.
I'm just wondering if at the Committee of the Whole meeting we could benefit from a report, a more formal presentation perhaps on the rationalization, the reasons behind what speed limits would be recommended in what areas, for what reasons, so that we're not all going off in different directions.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mike. Administrative update, Madam CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So there were a couple of things that I want to highlight in my notes this morning, just kind of reflecting back to the SDG Affordable Housing Summit. It was brought up at the last meeting, and there was also an Eastern Ontario Housing Summit in Ottawa. Both of them were fantastic one-day sessions that included community partners and local municipalities that have been successful with different strategies and different housing projects, but also bringing forward outside resources. And Eric Duncan spoke very well at the SDG Affordable Housing Summit, and I think he really hit the nail on the head when he said there's no amount of money that any form of government can generate to deal with the housing problem. So it really does require many different solutions with many different partners to come up with some ideas. And similarly, a similar tone to the one that was held in Ottawa. And I think that as more housing summits come up, I think it's critically important that our staff, as well as staff in local municipalities, and for those that are able to attend, continue to attend. I've got a couple of photos in here from the AORS trade show, a hugely successful event, also well executed by some of our transportation staff, but also by staff and some of the local municipalities. I know that Ewan McDonald and Sarah were instrumental in working on that, as well as some of our own transportation staff. The 1784 event, Mr. Warden, I've put in a couple of photos from that, another key event in that same week. So I think that was well attended and certainly a good celebration to have so close to our county building. And then I've put a few things in just with respect to my schedule and key dates. So we will look at a committee of the whole meeting per your comments, Mr. Warden. We'll try and see if we can coordinate something perhaps for July. Would like to remind everybody that's planning to attend, the Warden's Golf Tournament is on July the 19th. The AMO conference is August 18th to the 21st. We have submitted 2 delegation requests, one with the Minister of Education and one with the Minister of Transportation. And with that, I tried to do that as quickly as I could. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none. Thank you. Also just like point out that the SDG Summit, just to thank everybody for participating. I think it was a really great day. I can't believe you missed it, Councillor Williams. I'm just kidding, but it was great to see everybody come together and. No,
I was in Thunder Bay.
Sorry, I have not recognized you, ma'am. Anyways, so just thanks to all the staff for putting that together, and each municipality. As I said, it was a really great day. So thank you for that. Moving on to. Motions and notices of motion. At the previous meeting, Councillor Broad brought forth a motion, and I'll ask the clerk to read it out.
It's moved by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor St. Pierre, that staff be directed to provide a report with the draft terms of reference for Council's consideration for a committee to be formed to review requests for funding of social services programs, such as the Last Resort Program, United Way of SDG, and that a report be brought forward prior to the 2025 budget deliberations.
Okay, thank you. It's a great idea. Councillor Broad, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, I'll just make one comment. 2 hours ago, I asked a direct question. Tell me what was not funded under HPP that Last Resort funded, and they did not have an answer. And that's what this committee will partially do, get that answer for us.
Great. Further questions or comments on it? All those in favor? Motion is carried, none opposed. Ratification bylaw.
It's moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Williams, that bylaw number 5455, being a bylaw to adopt, confirm, and ratify matters dealt with by resolution, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
All those in favor? Motion is carried, none opposed. Adjournment by resolution. Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor Bergeron, that council adjourn to the call of the chair.
All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone.